Welcome, everybody, and you go, keep that away. Welcome to the discussion-only meeting of the City Council for Tuesday, September 3, 2019. Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Byron?
Here.
Councilmember Draymond?
Here.
Councilmember Stevens?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Allman?
Here.
Mayor Meadows?
All right, the next item on our agenda is approval, next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. And I'm going to move approval of the agenda, striking what is currently number 4.2, which is Greetings Tour Mural. We're not ready to get the information on that. And substituting the hub move-in in that location. So that's my motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other changes? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on our agenda is communications from persons in the audience. This is a time we set aside in every council meeting for anyone to talk about anything on or off the agenda. I do have some blue cards here, and for anybody else who wishes to address council, please fill out a blue card so the clerk knows exactly who you are. So
A couple of those are for the hub movement. I think
I know that. Yeah. So the first name I have is Sarah S. From the hub.
Oh, she's gonna go.
You want to go at a different time?
At the item.
Oh, at the item. You would rather wait until the item? Okay. This is a time set aside for communications from people in the audience. So is there anybody else who wishes to address council? I've got 3 cards here from the hub, and I assume you all want to wait, right?
If no one else wants to go, I'm not here to talk about
Welcome.
the vote, so I'll just, and everyone can figure out if they want to come up and talk. Diane Wing, 1024 Huntington Road, which is in the Chesterfield Hills neighborhood. And I'd like to talk about items 4.25 and 4.6. So 4.5 is proposed changes to rental overlays. And I was part of the neighborhood association, the Chesterfield Hills Neighborhood Association, at the time that we went through a very arduous process to try to start converting some of the rental homes to owner-occupied. And I guess my only comment to this is, as per Mr. Dempsey's 2014 memo, which is in your packet, I would say everything that's written in that memo is 100% true. Through the best efforts, through staff, I think council was involved. I remember Mayor Loomis at the time was involved. It was a Herculean attempt to have these rental homes converted, but at the end of the day, if the current property owner was not willing to sell at what was considered a fair market price, of course, the city saw huge losses on this. The other problem that we ran up against was some of the homes we were looking at were on West Grand River. They're very small homes. I call them the ticky-tack homes. They're very small, and being right on Grand River, I'm not sure what the marketability of those homes would have been, even if they would have been flipped into owner-occupied homes. So I guess my only comment on all of this is please heed that this is not a quick situation. I believe there's funds that have been set aside as part of what we did in the early 2000s that were earmarked for Chesterfield Hills. I believe those funds are still supposed to be held at the city. It would be good to know that those funds are still available, and if the funds would be made available to Chesterfield Hills should this type of program be reinstituted. If the program isn't reinstituted, I think then the conversation has to be had, what is going to happen to those funds? So that's just a question mark on that. I'm not the expert on this. There were other members of the neighborhood association who were far more involved with this process than I was. And if need be, I could perhaps rustle them back up again for another conversation just so that they could provide more input as well, if in fact you want that input.
Before you move on to your next question, can I just ask you a question? Is your sense from conversations within Chesterfield Hills or in our neighborhood association that there's sort of strong interest in still trying to flip, particularly the Grand River ones, or that market is still challenging?
I really don't know. It's been quite some time since anyone's ever talked about it, quite frankly. But I mean, just looking at those houses on West Grand River, anybody could see what the challenge is. And then adding to it the fact that Grand River is now 35 miles an hour. There's substantially more traffic on Grand River than there was back then, and a lot more construction traffic as well. So I think that entire stretch is just a challenge in general. The other item I wanted to talk about is the Historic District Guidelines. I am the vice chair of the Historic District Commission, but I'm speaking for myself now. The Historic District Commission has not had a chance to meet since this agenda was proposed, or published, I should say. So the items that are here, items 1 and 2, I'm happy to say that item 1 is already being addressed at the HDC. We recognized earlier this year that there is absolutely a lack of information on the city website that's readily available for anybody to be able to take a look at, get themselves up to speed on HDC guidelines, what they can and cannot do within a historic district. So we are already approaching that within the HDC. I think that over the years, for whatever reason, I think there was more information on the website in the past, and it seems to have disappeared. That could just be my perception of it, but I think we used to have more information. Now we have almost nothing on the website. So item 1 is absolutely, absolutely well taken and already being looked at. I would say that item number 2 actually almost belongs under item number 1. The issue of windows and doors, absolutely, windows and doors come up. It's one of the most sought after changes that people want to make within historic districts. And I think if there were more clarity on that, that also would be helpful. One of the things that we've talked about is the lack of education, that most homeowners don't have any idea how to take care of certain elements within a historic home, things that can be maintained rather than replaced. So education is important, and towards that end, I would like to suggest, if there is money in the budget, to perhaps have a wood window workshop. There are wood window rehabilitation specialists throughout the state of Michigan, none unfortunately here in the greater Lansing area. But we could do a 1-day or a half-day workshop and perhaps introduce interested members of the community into how easy it is to take care of wood windows. People look at a wood window and they think, oh my gosh, all I can do is replace it. I'm here to tell you wood windows can be fixed and they can be made energy efficient. So I'd like to throw that out as a possible suggestion. I have no idea how much a workshop would cost, but better to educate, right, than have people flounder and not have any idea as to what they could do with a wood window themselves. Last is the solar energy systems. I was beginning to recognize this as well. There's been several solar energy companies that have been within Chesterfield Hills recently that I've just happened to see. And that got me thinking, oh, how would we as the HDC handle a request if a homeowner were to come and say they wanted solar energy? And I think that's a very valid point. I think it has to be addressed within our guidelines. And I'm not sure what that would look like, quite frankly. We've not had a conversation about this as a body. This is just something that I recognized within the past few weeks, and so the time, I'm assuming these are yours. Okay, so the timing is really good on this as well, so that we should outline all of that. I would also like to call your attention on that vein to the Secretary of the Interior also publishes illustrated guidelines on sustainability for rehabilitation of historic buildings. That was published in 2011, and it's a very good guide, and I think we would put part of that on the website as well, because it's not just little sketches and little drawings, it's actual photographs of actual buildings, how they've been rehabilitated for things like solar energy, even wind energy for like commercial buildings or larger projects, which usually doesn't apply here. So I think there's good resources on that as well. So I was excited to see this memo. I think these are really good points, and I think these points need to be added either into guidelines or as part of an ordinance, and I know that's a longer process if it goes into ordinance world. And those are my only comments.
Hey, I do have a comment. Your first comment was directed towards 4.4, right? The reclaiming rental housing study law, low to moderate income housing.
That's correct, 4.4.
Okay. And then I was told, and I'll
sorry.
ask that staff clarify this, but I thought you had about $50,000 sort of in the bank, so to speak, to utilize to reduce the number of rental houses in the neighborhood. And I think that came originally from the construction of the apartment building across on Michigan Avenue.
Correct.
As part of the deal to approve that building. So we'll make sure that we find out exactly how much is available and how it might be used within the neighborhood. Okay.
And
And
that
that's
would-
one of the issues we want to talk about tonight anyways.
Right. And that would be the other resources, Ernest Schaefer. I don't know if he still owns Campus Village 2, but at the time that Campus Village 2 was
Right.
being built, he was the developer who was working specifically with the property owners, trying to get to buy the properties with varying degrees of success.
Right.
So Ernest Schaefer might be a good resource to talk to as well.
Yeah, Thank you.
Thank you.
And can I just say one quick thing too, because I don't know if you're going to stay for the whole conversation, but in terms of some of the historic district guidelines, at least from what I will be sort of discussing and proposing tonight, is that this will obviously go through the Historic Commission first before any kind of business item, before this would show up on a business
Sure.
agenda again. So just, it will come to your commission.
And as always, the disclaimer, we welcome you to visit and attend any of the HDC meetings to hear our business and hear the concerns that come up. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
I'll fill out a card later. Alice Streger, 621 Sunset Lane. Just wanted to also thank Shanna for that memo, which I think is exciting from the point of view of somebody who lives in the historic district. You know, our houses in the 20s were built prior to air conditioning, and they were built in ways that dealt with the heat. And one of the things that happened was they grew tall trees, but also the house is meant to be vented, and our house vents really, really well. So it's exciting to think about how to take the technology of today and what already exists in a 1920s house and reinvigorate that and think about ways to fix houses in terms of energy efficiency. Venting is something that I actually learned from a hardware guy who told me, your house was built to be vented and we'll teach you how to vent it. And it made an enormous difference in terms of cooling of our house. It still does. Regarding what's happening with rental districts, I would just want to share the information. I have no idea what it means, but in Oakwood right now, houses are going unrented much longer than we've ever seen before. What that means is that we have houses available where we did not before, and that leads to the potential for people renting later. That also seems to be giving students more power because they're able to rent later and therefore not have to sign leases that maybe are coercive leases to some extent. So that's been different. We also have families renting in the neighborhood, which we've not had before, and that's something pretty exciting because it means kids for the schools. And it means families able to live there. I don't know what that's due to. I don't know if it's because of the housing boom. I don't know if it's because of changes in the tax law. I don't know if it's because community policing has gotten so good in the city of East Lansing, which it has. It's improved the quality of life as far as I'm concerned in our neighborhood. I don't know what it's due to, but I hope when the housing study is done, we can actually come into the neighborhoods and try to figure out exactly what's going on that's causing this, because it's very interesting to see it happening. And I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, the flipping is something we all fantasize about in terms of being able to reclaim houses. In that sense, maintaining the historic district intention is an important thing, because if people are going to buy houses in our neighborhood, they're going to buy them because of those old bones. They're not going to buy a crappy old rental. They're going to want to buy a house that still has its good bones. And a lot of the houses in our neighborhood, even the rentals, do still have good bones. I'm kind of shocked sometimes when I go in to talk to a student group, to talk to them about being more humane towards their neighbors who have to get up for work in the morning, about how good some of the houses actually still look inside, and the potential for, I know gentrification is considered a bad word because it's associated with racism, but I talk about a different kind of gentrification, which is taking old rental houses and reinvigorating them as owner-occupied houses. But what I really came to just ask about, and the mayor knows I'm going to ask about this, is the Center City lease. I'm still trying to figure out when we get paid and when we're going to get, how much we're going to get paid. I've been able, with the help of Mr. Lee, to figure out with the hub that we'll start making money off of the hub starting essentially January 1st, because that's when essentially the new tax system will take an effect. And so we'll start making what I think will be about $200,000 a year from the hub for the city, $800,000 a year in terms of property taxes overall. In terms of Center City, as you all know, the money there is promised to the TIF for the next 30 years, so none of the taxes come back to us. A bunch of other stuff got also promised under the TIF, like the DDA payments of, I think, $39,000 a year. So what we're supposed to be getting is $200,000 a year for the master ground lease with regard to Lot 1, and this is what the development agreement says. As further described in the master ground lease, the developer shall pay the city $200,000 annually as rent under the master ground lease, with an adjustment for inflation. The $200,000 annual rent shall commence upon the following of the issuance of the certificate of occupancy for building B2, which is our parking garage. And for that first year thereafter shall be a pro rata payment of the $200,000, so we don't get the whole amount the first year. Annual rent based on the percentage of building B1, that's the retail that is leased. I've been informed by the city repeatedly that that refers to square footage. I don't see that in the documents, but I'll take your word for it that it's square footage of the amount leased. Starting 1 year after the issuance of the certificate of occupancy for building B2, that's the parking garage, 100% of the annual rent will become payable. So we'll be owed $200,000 a year once we're a year in from the certificate of occupancy. So I'm trying to figure out, when do we get the certificate of occupancy for the building that is the parking garage? The answer from Mr. Weaver, our building inspector, is there is no special CO for the parking garage. It's the CO for the entire structure, because the fire systems and other things are all tied together. So it's actually going to be a single CO for the retail, for the parking garage, and for the Newman Lofts. As a consequence, we may be many months out from seeing a CO because Newman Lofts is not done. And more importantly, if it is the case that the CO we're talking about is the permanent CO, we could be a long way out from that. And the developer would seem to have very little incentive to get everything done to get the permanent CO, because if they get a temporary CO, they can operate. And the permanent CO is when they have to start ponying up a lot of money. So this is a sort of disappointing paragraph in the development agreement in terms of its lack of clarity, and also the potential that we're not going to make our money very soon. And I've simply been trying to find out. Before the meeting today, the mayor told me he has ascertained that 51% of the square footage has been leased. I don't know when that date is. So do you have a date on when that 51% begins?
I have a date for when the CO begins, and as Scott Weaver had mentioned to me tonight, that they apparently are looking for October 1st to get their permanent CO, because that's when their safety inspection will take place.
Well,
So
Scott
at
may
that
well-
point in time, there will be a CO on the garage. As soon as the properties are finished, as I understand their leases, then they get their CO, their lease payment begins to the developer, and at that point in time, we would begin to receive our payments with regard to it.
So I don't know how an inspector is supposed to know in advance that a building's going to pass inspection. That didn't happen with the Hub, it didn't happen with Bailey.
I'm not saying that he's clairvoyant. I'm saying he says that it looks like at the end of the month, they will have their safety inspection. If it passes, it'll get its CO.
Right, okay. So when we get our CO, you think at that point that 51% of the leases will have begun?
I doubt that. I would think that it would be more like November or early December before those new businesses open up, although Foster will be open fairly soon, as I
So
understand.
the lease will begin October 1st, do you think, but the first payment will be zero?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, the next item on our agenda is the beginning of our discussion items, and the first item is a Sister Cities presentation. I think Chris Holman is here. Chris, are you making the presentation?
I am, and it's not Sissy Cities.
Sister.
I am Chris Holman, one of the members of the Board of Directors of the Sister Cities, CEO of Michigan Business Network and various other sundry things. But I am here talking a little bit about a global and a kind of a holistic view of this region. There are a number of things, and it occurred to me that East Lansing, more than any other of the areas and municipalities in this capital region, have probably the most diversity and the most cultural diversity of any of those communities. So this relationship makes some pretty good sense. The gentleman sneaking up behind me here is, you may know as Jack Davis, my bodyguard, but he is also a member of the board of directors there. So there are a number of things that would come with this relationship. One is we are schooled as an institution that's celebrating its 25th anniversary, as a matter of fact, Saturday night, in dignitaries' visitations, how you receive and how you send dignitaries. And I don't know how many of you had an opportunity to travel abroad at a dignitary status, but the manner in which other countries greet us, meet us, host us, etc., is very different than the one in which we are able to do that with them. And it's primarily a monetary system or circumstance, and it's also a problem of people not knowing exactly what is expected in visitations. So that would be an advantage to be part of the sister cities. There's also joining the well-established 25 years, as I said, and relationships and sister cities established for that many years. And I think of one of the two Chinese cities that I established relationships with 23 years ago and how that relationship has grown. That should be happening and can be happening here. Economic benefits, I think you've all been distributed some statistics from the national as to what the economic benefits of being part of the Sister City organization are. They are many and varied, and there are numbers that can be put with those things. Also, Sister Cities, like many initiatives, should be regional. Presently, it's funded by one source, which is the Lansing City, and that in a tough year, that can make funding go down a little bit. That can also lead to lack of perspective, new ideas, and different views of things. So that, I think, is a very important thing. So what we're here tonight asking for is you to join Lansing and other municipalities in the Regional Sister Cities Commission, not only from a funding standpoint, but also having representation on our Board of Commissioners. So I'm going to let Jack speak for a minute, but I did want to say this offhand. I want to thank you all for public service. I know a little bit about it, and it's an arduous task. My dad always said to me, public service is a necessity in your life. It's the best way to do the right thing and lose friends. So it isn't always an easy seat that you're sitting in, and I appreciate you being there. So with that, Jack, if you'd like to say a few words.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to be here. I wanted to let you know how respectful I am of East Lansing. I've been doing community action work for a long time, and East Lansing has historically been a real significant leader. And we're talking to you now because we're looking for you to help us on the leadership aspect. Join the board. Come to the event Saturday night, whoever can. I'll send you an email with the details. But it was East Lansing that was instrumental in the retained GM efforts back in the 90s. It was East Lansing that was instrumental in leadership in the retention of the School of Human Medicine on Michigan State's campus. I have had, and Mark Meadows was the active leader. And I just want to make sure how much you know it's appreciated. And we're not asking for a whole lot here. We're asking just for some interest. One of you on the council may have the ability to, or the interest to actually participate in an active way. I wanted to let you know the Sister Cities organization in itself has a very important international reputation. And we're using that reputation to see what we can do not only in cultural interchange, but also in the economic area, which you have some information on. And we are so dynamic here now in the international competition and the economics because you noticed what happened in Clinton County with the dairy industry. That was tremendous. You know that Denver was purchased by an Israeli company. You know that Turkey's strong here in this area. You're aware that Neogen is worldwide. You know NIOWAVE, as you know, just got a federal grant for a product which will be worldwide in nature. You know about FRIB. So let's get going here as a region. And let's use sister cities, or let's participate with sister cities in our effort to get to know the international community in a significant way. And when we have the economic side that we observe here at Michigan State and around the region, and we can, like we are with Israel, we're going to meet with them Friday about choosing a sister city in Israel where it also has a significant economic benefit for our region. So that's what we're doing, and we really hope you'll participate and cooperate. Thank you.
Any questions? How's that?
That would be it. Does anybody have any questions of these guys?
No, that's great. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the presentation, appreciate it. Hope to
Thank
see you Saturday night.
Well,
And I'll note that the city, even though we're not in the Sister Cities program, has a long relationship with Cluj-Napoca, Romania, which is a similar city to the city of East Lansing, although many hundreds of years older. That has a major university in it, and so we share a lot of common interests. The mayor there, Emil Bach, and I still correspond, and he left the mayorship to become the prime minister of Romania, then returned to become mayor of Cluj-Napoca again. So hopefully maybe we can work something out with regard to this. Anyway, thanks for coming this evening.
Thank you for the time.
The next item on our agenda is the hub move-in. So I'm going to pull out these blue cards again, and let's hear what you all have to say. Sarah, the hub, welcome. And Sarah, what's your last name?
Shanky.
Okay, go right ahead.
So I'm a resident at the hub, first year, like everyone else. And about a week ago, me and a few other people were stuck in one of the elevators for almost an hour. There were 17 of us total in the elevator, which was a lot, but we did the math and we were under the weight limit. Just want to point that out there. They have signs posted now outside the elevator saying that maximum occupancy is 9 people in the elevator, but that wasn't the case a week ago. So the elevator stopped, and we tried pressing the emergency button, which wasn't working. And we don't have any service in the elevator either. All 17 of us couldn't call for help. So we just ended up pounding on the door for about 5 minutes until someone happened to be walking by and heard us in the elevator and went and got help for us. And then it took about an hour for the firefighters to get us out.
Quick question for you. That was the only elevator in operation at the time, correct?
Yes.
And what was the response from management after the fact?
After we got out, we went down to the lobby because we all wanted to talk to management about what happened, but none of them would talk to us.
Interesting. And that was on move-in day?
No, this was, I
Okay.
believe, August 27th.
Gotcha.
Mark,
Go ahead.
when you said they wouldn't talk to you, you said, could we talk to you? And they said no, or?
Management, the assistant manager and the actual manager were in the back office, and the lady at the front desk said that they were too busy to talk to us.
And how did the firefighters get you out?
The guy who happened to be walking past the elevators and heard us pounding went and got management, and then they called the firefighters, and who opened the doors eventually somehow.
So you were between floors, or you were at a floor and the doors wouldn't open?
We were at the floor that we originally had gotten into. We had dropped a little bit, but not that much.
Okay.
So I just wanted to point it out that Sarah is here talking about this, but there are other people in that elevator that obviously experienced this, and we got another young woman that is going to talk a little bit.
Well, I'll call that her.
Yeah.
How's that? Okay. Any other questions of Sarah? Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for coming, Sarah.
Is it Rona King?
I think it's me.
It's you? Okay, sorry. I was having trouble reading this.
Hey, my name is Rodney King. I'm Senior Vice President of Development for Core Spaces based out of Chicago. Obviously, we're here tonight to discuss the hub move-in. I have a few of my colleagues here. I have Aaron Pernez, the Senior Vice President of Property Management, Mark Gohausen, Development Manager, and our Regional Manager also back there. So if there are any complaints about management, we can obviously address those here. We can answer any questions for you guys. But primarily, to talk about the move-in experience, we absolutely own the move-in experience. It did not go as planned, and we do apologize for that. We expected to get this TCO earlier in the day, and that did not happen. We got the TCO late in the afternoon, and that kind of, the plans did not go as we would have hoped them to. So we recognize that. We understand that it was a bad experience with the majority of our residents, and we apologize. We tried to do whatever we could that day to compensate them. We gave them $50 gift cards at Target if they needed to go get something in the interim time. We were passing out gift cards to Target to anybody who wanted them. We encouraged our customers to go have lunch on us, bring the receipts back, and if they needed hotel accommodations, we would pay for those then if they provided proof. as I said, we absolutely own it. We understand that it did not go as planned. We've learned some lessons from there, and we're confident that the lessons that we learned from there will help us be better in the future. Like I said, we're here to answer any questions, take any comments, and I have colleagues in the audience who can.
Eric, question?
Did you know about this elevator incident before tonight?
Yes, we did know about the elevator incident. Shortly thereafter, I did not know that she did not get to speak with management. As I said, we have our SVP of management here, who's more than willing to talk to her, who's more than willing to address anything that any complaint that she had. But we did know the next morning. I was made aware of the next morning.
Okay, you may want to come back up after we're done here, but I don't have any questions for you at this moment in time. Let's get
think she had something.
Sanjana up here.
Can I just add something really quick?
Go ahead.
I had sent management an email the next day detailing everything that happened with times and like how we were not over the weight limit and just like the math behind that really, and they had never responded to that email.
Okay, and that was the next day that you sent that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. How about Sanjana? Welcome, and let's start with that $50 gift card, okay? Because I saw you
Right.
reactive.
So,
Pull
let me
that microphone down to you a little bit, okay?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, great, thanks.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I
Okay,
can.
perfect. So, just to give you a little bit background, I moved all the way from California to go to grad school here 2 weeks ago. I was really hoping to live at this nice place right next to my workplace and it'd be convenient, right? Our move-in was 21st of August. I live on the 9th floor, so they assigned me to go between 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. to come pick up my keys and then move in. So they had staggered move-in for different floors throughout the day, which was perfect. At 12:30 midnight the previous day, on technically 21st early morning, we get an email saying furniture was supposed to be moved in last night, but they're not moved in, so we're gonna be moving it in the morning. So we're gonna move all your move-ins starting from 10:30. So you'll just be combined with the 8th and 7th floors, so just come in at 10:30. This was 12:30 midnight, early morning. Also, it's the night before move-in day. What if someone is driving 3 hours? They probably slept early and are ready to wake up at 5 a.m. and drive. So that's very inconvenient. And secondly, we got there at 10:30. Obviously, they didn't have their permit yet to let us move in or get keys. We were waiting all the way until 1, which was when we found out that they're probably not going to get their permit anytime soon. They offered to pay for our lunch. That's all I know. I don't know about this Target gift card. I was there. I did not get anything. And then we finally got an email around 3:30-ish saying that they finally got their permit so we could come pick up our keys and go move in. I picked up my keys, however, I did not move in immediately because I knew there was going to be a huge rush. So I chose to move in around 8 p.m., which by then, I thought at least 1/4 or 2/4 would have moved in. I get there, the line was about 4 hours long. The person who had gotten through half the line told me that they were waiting all the way from 3:30 till 8 p.m. to move in, and they still hadn't gotten ready to move in. In the email that they sent us to allow us to move in, they said they're gonna have a lot of movers to help us move in quickly and a lot of carts. Provided we come to know these carts are cardboard boxes on some wheels. They're cardboard boxes, and moving in stuff with cardboard boxes is very flimsy. So a lot of students who were moving into the hub went and stole carts from the residence hall right next to us, Snyder Hall. So Snyder Hall actually went on lockdown that day. And after Snyder Hall went on lockdown, we have those carts. We still have the carts in the building. So there are still Res Life carts from MSU that do not belong to the hub. That's just my move-in experience. I did not bother to stand in the line. I had 2 suitcases because I had moved in all the way from California. I just went inside because I didn't want to pay for an extra night of a hotel. And I was never offered this hotel. I asked and I insisted to Travis, who is the project manager at like the hub or whatever he works at. He said that they weren't paying for a hotel or anything. And there were multiple parents who had their flights booked back that same night, but weren't able to make that flight because they had to help move their kids in. And this was down, the traffic was down, let me give you the street names. It was down Cedar Street, and after Cedar Street, it went on Water's Edge both directions. And there was cops that were trying to regulate it, but there were two lines that were trying to like come inside to Cedar Street and then behind the hub. That's kind of the move-in experience. In terms of when we actually got to the apartment, it's a new apartment. What would you expect? Like clean stuff, new appliances. I come there, there's a layered inch of dust. And this is 8:30, 9 p.m. I don't know who would want to sit and clean then before moving in all our stuff. They offered us flea cleaning services, but it was way later, which was like this week and last week, half of last week, which was when they said we were going to offer free cleaning services. But by then, like if I had to move in my stuff and start school, which started last week, I would have already cleaned most of my stuff that really needed the cleaning. So that was really disappointing. I'm only complaining because I'm paying so much money coming all the way from a different state, trying to like start my own new life here. And if this is the situation that like is going to pin me down, it's very unfortunate. And not only that, but the trash situation is messy. I can show you pictures. Is that permittable?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, don't expect us to have the technology to show them up on the
Yeah,
screen
that's
or
fine.
anything like that, but.
So this is a trash chute room. So this is how you enter the room where you put trash down the chutes. This was yesterday.
Shoot, I would say.
The chutes were full, and the residents still put it outside. I agree, it's not management's fault, but there has to be something.
The chute goes all the way down to something on the ground?
Yes,
And the
I
chute
think it's.
itself was full?
The chute was full, so there's a small door to open the chute and put stuff in, and then there's a room to enter the chute. I have pictures of that too.
So people stacked that stuff in the room, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Because the chute was full.
Yeah. So a lot of people just trash the entire space. For the first week and a half after move-in, the lobby in front of the elevators was always filled with trash. That's, again, I agree, it's irresponsible residents, but it's also a health and fire hazard that I should not be dealing with if I paid so much money. Like with such a building with over 150 like units and 900 residents, if you're not gonna have enough trash, like trash filling stations, then that's not okay. So that's my little.
So you weren't on the elevator, right?
I wasn't.
Okay.
Luckily, but
How did you get to your room? I want to know. Did you go up the elevator? Or
yes,
did you,
I had to
okay.
wait. Like I had to wait an hour for the elevator that day, but the next day, so I work, right? I worked from 8 a.m. to midnight without any breaks. I come back, none of the elevators are working. I live on the 9th floor. There's 3 elevators, and if none of them are working, like what am I paying for at this point? I get that it's a new building, there's going to be problems, but something has to be adjusted.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, do it.
Have you spoken to management?
Yes,
prior to
I've
tonight, or
actually
emailed, or?
yes, I've
Okay.
emailed multiple times, and
Okay.
like her, I've never gotten a response.
If you're comfortable, what type of unit are you living in?
I live in a studio.
Okay, and
So yes, the 9th floor is supposed to be an extra paid. I totally forgot about homeowner confident. So the 9th floor, we pay a little more extra than the other floors for extra facilities, quote unquote. Number one, we're supposed to have floor restricted access for safety. Since I moved all the way from California, I don't know how safety works here, but I definitely don't have floor restricted access. Anyone can get in the building, anyone can walk in my floor. So that's not there. Secondly, I'm supposed to have customized closet organization. I don't even have a closet. It's not built. And when I asked them, they said, oh, they just left without finishing it up. And they haven't given me a timeline. They gave me a temporary closet, and like when they drilled in the temporary closet, there's like all like the paint powder on the ground. They didn't even bother to clean that up.
So your apartment was incomplete
Yes.
when it was provided to you?
Yes. The entire 9th floor, all the units have either half completed closets or no closets at all.
Go ahead.
Have you been offered a discount on your rent? because
No,
you don't have
not
to-
yet. I actually reached out, and because September 1st was when my second part of my rent was due, and I reached out to Travis. He emailed me back for that one and said that they would reach out to us this week for compensation, but I don't know what that looks like, what that timeline is, or anything.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you. Also, my $50 Target gift card.
Yeah. All right, anybody from the hub wish to come back to the microphone?
I'll let Mark address the elevator issue. Obviously, elevators, they have been intermittent in operation. We are working with one of the top 3 elevator companies in the world, Schindler. They have been responsive-ish. Our goal is to obviously have all the elevators working 100% of the time, but there is some tweaks there we are making to the elevator. And regarding any complaints from anybody in the audience, as I said, we have our SVP of Property Management here tonight. She's willing to meet. I'm willing to meet with anybody. They can send us their contact information, and we'll make sure that we can follow up with them. Yes, sir.
How much do you charge for a studio?
I don't have the rental. I don't know the rental rates. That would be
$12.74.
correct.
So, is there any plan at this point to offer any kind of compensation via the issues that they've had? And
I'll let Erin address that. The kind of our compensation plan. She, as I said, she oversees the day-to-day property management.
That's fine.
I don't know if there's a detailed plan yet. I don't work on that side of the operations, but I can get it.
You see the issue with this,
I can
obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Erin Perez. I'm the Senior Vice President of Property Management.
Erin.
Hi. So I'm here this week, and we have Nandra Jackson, who's not the regional manager for this site. However, she's just here to help address the issues and talk to the residents individually. So we take it for a case-by-case basis. So I need to listen to them and see what their issues are, walk their units with them if they're willing, and then at that point, we can discuss compensation as well.
So here's an unsolicited suggestion. So these are not the only people that have reached out to me. The reason why I added this onto the agenda was because I had several students as well as student organizations reach out to me and express their distaste with the issues that they faced at the hub. Now, I was really excited about this project, I have to tell you.
Sure.
When this came up, it was bike friendly. It was close to campus. I was a student when we had very limited selection in apartments that I could customize if I'm living with somebody, if I'm not living with somebody, if I didn't need amenities, if I didn't, that were nearby a walking distance to campus. So I will illustrate, I voted for this project. I was very excited for this project. I was terrified hearing these stories. Imagine as an elected official hearing the story of constituents that you're supposed to protect being trapped in an elevator for an hour with an emergency button that does not work. That in itself, and honestly, I went to the hub and I saw the paper signs that are there that now say max occupancy 9. For one elevator to not have anybody supervising that process and to not have anybody witness the one elevator that's not working being out of operation and people inside is scary to me.
Sure.
And so there's another project that's being proposed in that area for the same developer, and I have to say it's not looking good on my end. Unless there's something done to significantly alter what has happened here, And I mean reach out too. I don't want to have to, as a council member, make myself available to reach out to every individual person at the hub to get their individual experiences. Because I can tell you, just by walking through the halls and asking people, they all told me the same story. Right? And so it's got to be a conceded effort on your part to reach out to your residents and make sure this is fixed.
Absolutely.
Because this is a significant issue for me.
Sure.
We do recognize it. That's why we said we're here tonight. If these four of our customers tonight, they have an issue, please reach out to us. We'll try to address it as quickly as we can. Erin has her business card. I have my business cards. If they tell us a problem, we will solve it. We're not trying to skirt responsibility or try to do it. If there's a problem in the building, we will solve it.
Hence why we are here. I called Nandra last week to see, this was last minute, I think we booked our trip on Thursday because we wanted to make sure that we were readily available for the residents this week as well. We're here through Thursday late afternoon. I mean, like I said, I'd be happy to address their specific issues. I addressed a couple today, so that is what we are here for.
So give me a...
Eric. So there may be problems with the building, but it sounds like there's also problems with the people running the building. What do you say to the allegations that people have emailed the management company and tried to talk with people at the management company, haven't got any response?
Sure. I would need to dig into that more. I know that they have been bombarded with a lot of emails, so maybe it got lost, and that's no excuse. But I would have to get with the on-site manager, Travis, and Mike Gasparetti, who are the regional managers, to see if there's anything that maybe perhaps slipped through the cracks. I know it's been a busy last 7 days. Again, it's not an excuse, but it's something I will dig into deeper while I'm here as well.
Ruth?
My question, I think, is more for the city. I'd like to, I don't understand how this place was approved specifically. Can we recheck the elevators? Because
Yes, so the city does not do elevator inspections. Scott Weaver, our building official, could be here to come up and talk about this issue if we have specific questions, but elevators are inspected by the state of Michigan.
Okay.
The city would simply see that the inspections were completed, and then that would possibly go from there. But Mr. Weaver could certainly come up and talk about the elevators, which are obviously a very important issue. So after the
Okay, we can
Scott, until
Yes.
we're done with that.
Okay, and then then the trash, who looks into making sure the trash capacity is adequate?
You know, I think that's a design issue. We'd have to look back at the plan review to see what was reviewed and if it was built to specifications, but I can't imagine that it was not. So I don't understand why there would not be sufficient trash chutes, but again, this code official could talk about that as well.
Okay, and then the security issue, we wouldn't have had anything to do with that either?
I don't think that's something, I did ask
Okay.
about the closets to see if this is like are there closet organizers that were supposed to be built in, but there's an actual physical closet, but there's not built-in shelving? Is that the type of thing that she was referring to? But we can ask that as well.
Okay, thanks.
Shannon?
So I'll just echo those. I mean, obviously, some of these are sort of between contractees and the contract, but I think you're hearing loud and clear, and I would echo what others have said, to be proactive in reaching out to folks.
Absolutely.
My big issues, the elevator thing, I actually hadn't even heard that until just recently, and that's, you know, we got to deal with that with the state. But the communication side of things and the interaction with the management is the issue that I've been most concerned about in hearing from people, and mostly because as you folks came in and we were talking about this was a big part of our decision making when we talked about allowing this building to get a special use permit and go up higher than it normally would, and to have some of these amenities like the roof deck and things. It was a lot of that was this premise and this promise that there's on-site management, and that this was a huge part of our conversations. And so you have to know that for a matter of trust with us as the city, a matter of trust with your clients, and with the surrounding neighborhood, you have to rectify this, and you have to rectify it now. And it means not saying emails are lost, or I get it, it's been 7 days, but you got to put, whether that's people from your headquarters on answering those emails, or having somebody come in who's just doing that, setting up a table in the entryway. I don't know what it is you got to do, but that communication channel has to open, and that security and that safety that your clients have to feel is a big part of the promise you guys made to us and to the community. Has to be fixed now.
And just to address the security issue, we do have a new security protocol. Obviously, I'll let Aaron go into detail about it, but we do have a new security protocol. There was some incidents, and we've beefed up that protocol to make sure that our customers are feeling safe. Aaron can kind of elaborate on what the new protocol is.
Right now, we have a guard there on site Monday through Thursday from 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. who should be checking fobs at night for whoever enters the building. And then on the weekends, we have 3 security guards on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And if we have any events on the rooftop, we will have additional security as well to monitor the rooftop activity should we be hosting any of our events. And I agree with you. That's, again, I wasn't trying to make an excuse about, but that's why we are here. We got word that they needed help, and we wanted to make sure that these residents didn't feel ignored. Unfortunately, they do feel that way, but we heard them loud and clear. We heard our on-site team loud and clear, which is why we brought out more resources this week, was just to give them some more help. And Nandra and I are here just to really help any residents that come our way over the next couple of days.
Aaron, did you have something else?
Yeah, no.
Go.
On the trash issue, were you aware about the trash stacking up outside the chutes and in the hallways?
I was not, but I can say it's not unusual for trash to stack up during the early days of the move-ins. There's an abnormal amount of large boxes because of people who are moving in. That tends to dissipate as people stop ordering things. But during the move-in, we'll obviously make more rounds through the trash rooms to make sure it's not backing up the system. But from a design perspective, we do have adequate capacity for normal trash. This amount of trash is abnormal, and it's kind of customary to all of our developments during the first few weeks of move-in.
That they're full of trash?
Well, they are full of trash because of people are moving in, so people are using an abnormal amount of trash, and we need to do a better job of monitoring the trash room and make sure they're clear, and maybe do a couple extra pickups between now and when the trash subsides, it goes back to a normal level.
Maybe do a couple extra pickups.
What
am I missing here?
Well, I was just made aware of the trash issue, so we need to investigate it to make sure.
You got a left-hand, right-hand problem that is unimaginable in scope here. It seems like none of you people know what the other people are talking about.
Well, I was just made aware of the trash issue tonight. So we will investigate it and make whatever corrections we need to make to ensure that the trash is properly picked up.
Aaron, you had something else?
I'm just going to reiterate what I said before. And I think other council members would probably like to be aware of what's being done after the fact. And I'm going to harp on this one more time, but reach out from management to all residents is important. Not if residents come to us, we're going to address it, because every single resident that I've talked to at the hub so far has told me a similar story.
Sure.
Understood.
So I'll just have a couple of comments. I just want to reiterate to be proactive, because I think you need to contact every resident of this building to make sure that they don't have a complaint and they don't have an issue that needs to be resolved. It's not about having your door open and anybody can come in to make a complaint when they feel like it. I think you need to be proactive with regard to it, and I think that's my expectation. As far as the trash issue, I know you just became aware of it, but did you really? Because you have opened these facilities throughout the country. This isn't like a new thing for you. You knew that on move-in day, there's going to be a huge amount of trash in this building. So proper management would have taken care of this issue, especially after you opened your very first building and saw that this happens. So I'm very disappointed in the way management took place, and we haven't even begun to start to talk about what happened on the rooftop of this building during the time that this building was opening. And the fact that we had to close down that rooftop because there was inappropriate, improper management of what was going on up there. So there's a lot of problems here, and the expectation I would have is that we will get a report showing how you have systematically corrected each of these problems. Because, like Aaron, I'm thinking, why would we ever open another hub, even close to campus? I mean, there's definitely a benefit of knowing that you can walk across the street to your classes or to your work. It just doesn't seem to be something that actually pays off for the city, given the fact that we had to send fire trucks out there to get people out of elevators. We had to send police officers up there to close down a roof. I mean, we're spending money to keep you open. That isn't the way this is supposed to work.
And if I can just chime in, on move-in day, we did have temp helpers lined up, and while I was not here myself, our regional manager, Mike Gasparetti, did keep me posted, and they showed up for about an hour and left. We had another company lined up and they didn't show up on Thursday. I believe they came on Friday. So we did have temp help lined up to help in any capacity. And I think that hindered us a little bit with the trash issue as well.
And we did, I was actually here on move-in day. We did have extra roll-off bins for additional trash. Part of our CO processes, we did have to remove 2 of the 3 that we had, so we only had 1 per the direction from the city. So obviously, we're not making excuses. The problem is there's trash in the rooms. We will figure it out. The rooms will be clean. And if there's any other issues, as you said, we'll be proactive in our communication. If there are issues that our customers are seeing, they can email me, they can email Aaron. We will get to the bottom of them and make sure they're happy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott? Welcome, I think.
Yes, good evening. How are you, folks? So just to speak to the trash real quick, he is correct. We did ask the hub to remove some of the dumpsters that were there, primarily because they were full. When we were there first thing in the morning to start looking at the TCO that morning, they had 2 dumpsters outside that were overloaded with extra trash from the building still on the property. And that was a big deal for us to get those out of there, get the trash out of there, because we understand that there's going to be additional trash. So they did take away 2, but they took away 2 because it was full. Speaking to the elevators, we have very, very limited authority on an elevator. Pretty much rolls down to the electrical inspector looks at the power that is supplied to the elevator rooms, the machine rooms, those type of things, and the lighting to the disconnects, and that's as far as we go. After that, it is completely up to the installer, and the state elevator inspector from that point will pick it up, and they do their load test, their balance test. They do all of the programming. Now, on the day of the TCO, when they had their move-in, they had 2 elevators that were approved by the state of Michigan, which is what that building is required to have. Their 3rd elevator was being inspected. At that time, it was scheduled for 4:30 in the afternoon, but the state elevator inspector was there earlier in the day, if I remember right, like around 2 or maybe 3 o'clock. So sometime during that opening day, they did end up having 3 elevators, but it would have been hours into the late evening.
Eric, you had a question?
How could a state inspection miss the kinds of problems that we're hearing about?
I can't answer that, Eric, much as I'd like to. I know they had the state elevator inspector working overtime. They had permission from the state. How they got that, I couldn't answer that either. I do know that as they were finishing up those pieces, I received an email from somebody at the hub, I want to say his name was Chad, that the elevator inspector had left at 3:30 in the morning. So how they worked that out, I really can't answer that question.
All right, any other questions, Scott? Go ahead.
Just a side note, issues with the rooms, layers of dust and debris after the construction, that wasn't noted as an issue when giving the certificate?
We don't typically look at the dust and things like that. Debris we do, and I can tell you that our inspectors were in every single room, and to speak of excessive dust, I can tell you that was not there. We witnessed them doing the preliminary construction cleaning, and we witnessed them bring in quite a large cleaning crew, and they were cleaning windows, they were cleaning floors. So without seeing that specific room, I couldn't answer that question, other than I know our guys looked at it, and if it was filthy, they wouldn't have accepted it.
So Scott, I just want to point out that a company like Core Spaces most likely would not hire a cleaning crew to offer for free for the residents unless there was a significant enough issue with a number of different rooms. And so, it's not something that I didn't hear from, it's not something I heard from one person.
Understood.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Eric.
Do you look at issues like whether the build-out is complete in a given room? So if there was a closet missing in a given room, is that something that you would A, notice, and B, take into account?
Yes, so when we're looking at the build-out, obviously we start with the life safety, and we work ourselves down to the more minor items. So throughout the build-out, we had some of the furniture that was being installed ahead of time, such as the Murphy beds. So the Murphy beds had receptacles and lights that were built into them, and the actual operation of the Murphy bed would have caused an abrasion on the electrical cord and would have eventually been a fire hazard. So they had to replace that whole piece, because this is now a UL listed item, so you just can't go in and go down to the Ace Hardware and cut that off and replace it. They have to replace that whole whip. And in doing that, one of the other things they need to do is the receptacle that they supplied on that Murphy bed needed to be tamper-proof receptacles, which is required in dwelling units nowadays. So we do look at those. We had another issue with some of the furniture that was coming in where you had one large room and they had back-to-back closets. And in the first issue that we had, it made the rooms too small, so they didn't meet the minimum requirements for a living space. And then once they got that corrected, the other issue they had that it came too close to the door, so you would walk into a single entrance and then you would walk to the left or to the right into the respective bedrooms, and they didn't meet the minimum requirements for openings in that space as well. So when it comes to the closet, I can't speak to the closets as causing an issue. So and that is more considered a finish, which the code doesn't regulate. Okay. But when we see those going in as electrical issues, or we see them as they're impinging the actual space for entrance to another space, then yes, we do look at those.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions of Scott? Thanks very much.
All right, thank you.
I have a quick comment.
You can come back up. Go right up to the microphone.
As for the dust and debris, there are actually unoccupied apartments still that if we ran right now, I could show you how much dust there is. So unless they cleaned it up right now, there is a lot of dust.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think we're moving on to the next item at this point in time. I think we've all vetted on this one. The next item on our agenda is temporary parking for food delivery drivers. It's a report. Who's making this? Okay. Caleb, welcome.
Hi, everybody. So it was brought to staff's attention that food delivery was a concern in alley, I think maybe by Grubhub, was concerned about temporary parking for food delivery. What staff got together and looked at is that we have approximately 30 spaces in the downtown area spread throughout the downtown that are 15-minute and 30-minute loading zones. So what our thought was is that we would recommend encouraging ride shares and food delivery services to utilize the 30-plus parking spaces we have in the downtown to stop and pick up food from local businesses or to drop off and pick up rides. I don't know what individual questions council had pertaining to this, but.
Anybody have anything? Go ahead, Ruth.
Just the person that was asking about it was asking about parking in the alleys.
Okay. So alleys are for commercial vehicles, and I don't know that their Grubhub vehicles have a designation as being a commercial vehicle, though I know the argument from one of the individual Grubhub drivers is that it was. We could involve the police in that to decide if they are commercial vehicles.
We could also have Heather Pope from the DDA stand up and Economic Development stand up and talk a little bit about the alleys, because managing the alleys and keeping it open for deliveries. Okay.
That's okay, I just wanted to make that.
I'd like to hear that, though.
Yeah.
Come on.
I didn't realize she was here.
We were going to call her home and have her come in.
I was hiding in the back. So yeah, so the alleys are, we really encourage all the deliveries to be done off the alley. Grand River, actually there's not supposed to be any deliveries off Grand River Avenue. Our alleys are for the delivery trucks to come through, and as you know, our downtown is getting busier. So we're trying to make sure that those areas are clear so the vendors can come through, make their deliveries, and move on. What we immediately started to see when we opened up the new alley is there's this nice wide alley and cars start parking there. And so we've been working with PACE to monitor those areas. If they see people parking there, to ask them to move, otherwise they will be ticketed, so.
Go ahead.
So, but if they are like an Uber Eats or whatever delivery, if that, do we have some issue with, is that a commercial vehicle or not? I mean, is that, in theory, they are not?
Our understanding is they'd be, if it's an ordinary car, a car like you or I would drive and you're doing Uber Eats, that you would be ticketed like anybody else. But I can ask the chief to weigh in on that. Chief, if you have a different opinion on that. we have the whole crew here. We can bring everybody up. Everyone gets a chance
I
to
just
weigh
think
in.
as long as we have clarity,
Yeah.
I think we just have to have a clear and consistent policy across these, because I did think that was one of the other issues he was raising. Is sometimes it's ticketed and sometimes it's not. And then I think when I look at this map, I mean, it looks like there's some pretty good coverage, although part of this is blocking Division Street. You know, as we do grow and more restaurants, I mean, we can think what we like about delivery services and all of that. I think this is not going anywhere. And I think shared ride services are not going anywhere. So this sort of managing the curb is going to just continue to come to our attention. So I just think we need to revisit this. So the ones, you know, even for example, like by LS, there's the two right on MAC and the two right out front. And you see a lot of turnover of those. I was watching that this weekend a little bit. But some of the other ones, they don't feel like they turn as much, or they do get full, like some of the ones along by the Charles Street Garage. So it's, you know, when you have a cluster of restaurants in there that are popular for that, you know, which there are a couple fast food ones there, it's going to get jammed, and I just think we're going to have to keep watching it.
Go ahead.
Just as a side note, you know, we as a council had a conversation a while ago as well about rideshare and specific loading zones for that. The proposed future additional loading zone space, I mean, you know, before Center City, we all know Albert Avenue right outside of Harper's has every Friday and Saturday is just jam-packed full of Ubers and Lyfts trying to pick people up, trying to, you know, get access to, you know, it's stopping traffic. People are walking through the streets to get away from the cars. So I think this is, you know, this kind of temporary parking is definitely an issue, and I maybe don't see it as fully wrapped into food delivery services, but you know, this future additional loading zone space would be probably a good location to try and quell some of that traffic. So I'd be open to hearing a little bit about that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to also mention that with the ride share, we do in the gated lots have 5 minutes free parking, so they can hop in, pick somebody up. But with the ride share also, there's the concern that I've used Uber a few times myself, and they come and they want to pick somebody up right at that spot where their phone is pinging from, where that GPS is. So it's very difficult to put in a space like, okay, this one's for ride share.
Yeah.
Are they going to use it if it's not right in front of where that person's standing? You have to go down to there, and if it's snowing out, customer's not going to go down to that spot. They're going to go in front of Buffalo Wild Wings or whatever, and they want to walk out the door when their car is there. So there's the difficulty of establishing where those spaces are, but having more loading zones around town is as easy as that stuff comes online. So,
Yeah, we currently, when you leave a parking garage before 10 minutes is up, you received a free parking spot, right?
5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Yep.
Well, let's talk about that then. Because if it's Grubhub and they want to come into the new parking garage, let's say, and walk down and pick up stuff, load up the car or whatever, you know, it's going to take longer than 5 minutes. Is it possible that we need to look at that time frame and expand it a little bit? Because 5 minutes is not very long for anybody, let alone Grubhub. If it was 15 minutes, I'd say, you know, then you've got time for anybody to park their car, go in, pick up whatever they're going to pick up, hop in and get out of the parking garage. I think we need to address this in a little bit different way as well.
The 5 minute was intended, I thought, to be more if someone came in accidentally and wanted a quick
Right.
turnaround and
Right.
did not have them pay, as more of a convenience for the mistake you
Yeah,
made driving in.
and that's
It
been
really
in place
wasn't-
for many years.
And it wasn't
Yeah.
intended to be a
ride
quick
share
stop-in. It
solution.
wasn't supposed to be a quick stop-in solution for people, but that's why it was such a brief period of time. It's you come in, you messed up, and you want to go back out, but that's another solution.
criticizing the original
Yeah.
decision. I'm just saying that now we have a whole different circumstance.
Right.
And if we want people to come downtown, even just to pick up something, like at a Target store quickly, then they may want to park in that garage, and if they can get in and out in 15 minutes, there's no reason we should charge them for that. So I'd like us to take a look at that.
Yeah, we can look at numbers for how it would impact the parking fund for the 10 minutes free, and we also can encourage folks to utilize the 40% discount validation program that the city offers for businesses downtown, like Target, for example, they utilize that, so.
Well, and I think there are some cities that are starting to look at this curb management and trying to how do you have, and that are trying to work with Lyft and some of those about sort of how do you direct that traffic?
Right.
So if you're standing outside of Harper's, it's automatically picking you up inside that garage. They're struggling with that conversation. But I think that conversation is going to evolve rapidly with those companies in the next 24 months. And so I think to the extent we're just staying on top of that in a little longer policy, 15 minutes while the Uber's waiting for you, we might need to think about that. I don't know if there's loading spaces. I don't know. That's just something I think we're going to have to watch.
Go ahead.
Back to the alley issue, do the food delivery services know that their cars aren't commercial vehicles? I mean, you can't tell us what
Don't
they
know
know,
for
I
sure.
understand that, but-
One particular Grubhub driver I spoke with did claim that it was a commercial vehicle, but my understanding is that you have to have special codes on your vehicle, a sticker that says that vehicle's identification number as a commercial vehicle.
So
And
is
it's a
this
certain
something
font and.
Is this worth trying a targeted communications effort? Not like you don't need more, you don't need more targeted communications efforts, but is this something that we can make some headway by making sure that the drivers know that they're not commercial?
Find out what the exact details are. I'm sure we could do some sort of a press release or something, maybe.
I think that might simply frustrate them more that they think they should be commercial perhaps because they're doing a commercial enterprise, but I don't know, that's through the Secretary of State. You need to let them know that they are in fact, even if they're driving for work, but they're not designated as a commercial vehicle, they're in fact not a commercial vehicle.
And there are other spaces for them to park.
And, right, this is about making sure that everybody knows what the rules are and abides by them, right, as much as we can. And it sounds like some of the confusion here is because they don't know that they can't do what they're doing. Unless I'm missing something, that they're just not entirely sure that they're.
Just making a claim that they're unsure of, but maybe just trying to get away with parking in the alley, possibly.
Fair enough, right.
Go ahead.
Just as a side note, I am definitely one of the millennials that when I am using the Lyft app, I'm expecting, hello, I'm right here. It's coming to pick me up right where I'm standing. But I've been in a few cities where, places and even a lot of airports are now doing this too, where they will have designated ride share areas. And, if it's not necessarily designated, I know this sounds a little bit ridiculous, but if it's not necessarily designated as a loading zone, but actually as a ride share pickup, I tend to, in my, dumb brain of I'm going to sit here and wait for my car, if I see the sign, I'm like, oh, okay, I have to go over here. So, just because we live in a college town, it might be something to look at in the future, because something that's actually marked, something that becomes a pattern and something that you recognize, like if I'm going to get a lift, this is where I have to go. It's not, I think it's something we should look into.
Can definitely do that.
Okay, any other questions? Thanks. The next item on our agenda is reclaiming rental housing study, low to moderate income rentals. Who's coming forward?
I was going to wait and see if you had more to say. Plus, I was trying to find my place in my computer from where I was a minute
And
ago.
I see the CEO of Capillary Housing Partnership is in the back as well. So.
Yes. As you can see, I did provide a memo, just kind of giving a little bit of history and background to some of the things that have been done historically and to date, and to give some context to begin a conversation about what may want to look at moving forward. One of the other things I know is that we have been talking about as staff is the housing study, and I'm working with other staff on that and hopefully partnering with some of our jurisdictions that are neighbors for at least a baseline study. And then if other partners aren't interested in beyond that, then we certainly would see what we could do ourselves to kind of do a second maybe type survey with more detail, and based on what we find in the first and baseline type housing survey. So that was kind of to get the discussion going, kind of share and get everyone started, and I'm happy to answer more questions or hear feedback from you all on what you'd like to see from us moving forward.
Eric.
So I had a question about the Campus Village arrangement from a few years ago.
Quite a few years ago.
So it looks a little bit complicated, the way that happened. And my understanding from reading the memo is that we offered a brownfield plan, essentially. We offered reimbursement for eligible activities through tax increment finance in exchange for consideration from the developer toward reclaiming rental licenses. Is that basically what we did?
I think in a nutshell, you've captured that. I think it was as far as I know, it was our first kind of project, and as it turns out, only. We thought it might be the start of something that would be more ongoing when a developer wants to come in and do a larger project. And that maybe was a little bit unique in that it was a large project next to a particular neighborhood that had a few rental properties. And I say that in comparison to some of our other near campus neighborhoods that have substantially more rental properties. So it was kind of a good test market to try that. As I would recall, it was some time ago, and I was only involved in parts of this particular project. So some of it I would have to go back and research, because I wouldn't have been hands-on involved in all of it.
So the question that I had was sort of about the logistics of doing this, sort of finding a way basically to use tax capture to pay for the cost of reclaiming rentals, even though that's not an eligible expense.
Right.
Right, because it sounds like that's what we did here.
I don't think that was exactly it, no.
It was an eligible expense on the apartment building, that's how it worked. So the developer of the apartment got the tax capture to pay off, to buy the rental license.
Well, okay, so that's my question.
Yeah.
I don't think that buying back rental licenses is an eligible expense under state law, right?
No, they
No,
didn't.
but the eligible expense was related to the actual construction of the.
Yes,
building.
exactly. So we agreed to reimburse them for eligible expenses that we didn't have to agree to reimburse them for, that had to do with the construction of the building, right?
Right.
And then the deal was, they would put some money into this kitty to buy back rental licenses.
Right.
Which seems like a great idea to me, but it seems to circumvent the intent of state brownfield law. If it's legal, it's fine.
Those were legitimate permissible expenses with regard to the property.
Right, but the deal was they were only going to get those reimbursements for those things if they did this other thing for us.
Go back and raise a charge.
No, I do not. I'm just trying to figure out what's possible.
Oh, well, at this point, what we've been talking about is rental for homeowner without a big apartment in the middle of that equation. So that would be harder to do, because you can't give a property to somebody that's willing to buy it and say, you don't have to pay property tax for 20 years so that to make up for your loss in this building, because there's no eligible expense.
Right. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So I guess one thing that we might want to know going forward, maybe the housing study could talk about this particular situation, how the city was able to do that. My memory is that we picked up, we eliminated the rental properties on Lexington and Bircham as a result of that agreement. I think those were owned by Good Sir, and I think Good Sir bought into the building, the apartment building, as part of the deal to eliminate those. I can't remember exactly.
I would have to check that, because
Yeah.
I was thinking they all were.
But I think we also used it to try to reduce the number of rentals in the periphery of Chesterfield Hills.
Right, Grand
And
River.
even across Grand River.
Yes.
And we obtained some of those. I don't know that we left it to the neighborhood association to work the rest of it, and it never has played out.
Right,
Because there's one rental in the neighborhood, a duplex, and I think that's all that's in there. So.
In the middle of the neighborhood.
Yep.
There is one duplex, and then there are some near the on the main streets. I'd still want to check Grand River. I think we still have some, and then on,
Michigan.
there's one more right off behind Michigan, and the name of the street escapes me right at this moment, but there's two kind of what you would call interior type properties in that. As I recall, the developer had extinguished the rental licenses, so took those properties, extinguished the rental licenses, and sold some of them, and some of them, I believe it became more of a struggle, but eventually those properties were sold.
Go ahead.
How much extra would it cost to condemn a rental license as opposed to just buy it from somebody who's willing to sell it?
Well, we do have the authority to condemn rental licenses.
Right. So the question is, how much extra would that cost?
That's a good question.
Is it
because
double
we'd
the
have to go-
cost of
It
the-
would be like every other condemnation. It would be us sort of assessing the value, they having their own value, and then us battling it out in court. We could do, I think, well, Tom's not here tonight, so we could ask this question at a later time, but it's something called a quick take, which we have used in the past, where we would take a piece of property, have the assessment, hand over the money from our assessed value. It still goes to the court, and if it's more, then we got to come up with some more money. Otherwise, it becomes, but we take ownership of it immediately, as opposed to waiting until the end of the court case. So that, but in any event, all that is expensive. So, go ahead.
So, Mayor Pro Tem Altman, I was thinking, we talked about this when you first got elected. This is one of the things you really wanted to do, was to do what we could to convert non-conforming rentals back into home ownership. And I had looked at this in my first term as well. And I always looked at the new developments as a potential, because whenever you have a new development, a developer, not whatever, but usually wants something. And we talked about using some of that TIF to do exactly what they did in East Village. The problem was we needed all those TIFs for the developments themselves, or it's turned out so far. But for, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, Hub wanted to build some more of these get-rich-quick, don't clean, don't put in closets developments with stairs instead of elevators this time, just to make it work better. Anyway, let's say they did that. They don't need TIF. They've never asked for TIF. But we could say, you know, we have enough of those, and we can't, after we do our housing study, if that turns out to be the case, you know, we don't need any more rentals. So we need to condemn these other rentals, not condemn. We need you to make it possible for these other rentals to disappear in order for us to let you build that monstrosity number 2.
That's exactly what I was cooking up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shannon.
So I'm going to be, I'm just going to step us back and ask the bigger picture question of what are we trying to accomplish here? I guess this comes up a lot. We've had some of these conversations, and do you take some of the pressure off? And certainly there are some of these single family homes, and I think there are, you know, when you look at, and I was trying to pull up the rental license, a map that you sent us for a couple meetings ago, but there are a couple places, right, where we have a few rental properties that are really right smack still in the middle of some homeowners, like north of Bailey. But it's, at this point, I think that we're talking about a smattering of some of these. I think the point that was made earlier by Diane about, you know, converting properties on Grand River, those properties are never going to be single-family homes. I do not believe they will be. I don't believe that the shape that they are in, that the size that they are, that on a 35-mile-an-hour Grand River, that they are going to be a high demand for that. And I just, other than a few where I think we might want to think about creative things, I guess I just want to make sure we're asking the right question, like, what are we trying to achieve? Do we really think we're going to get all of these, or 20% of our single-family type homes to that we have such a low amount of for-sale properties that we're going to clear these out? And maybe that is really where we're going, but I guess for me, I'm not sure that objective is high enough or worthy enough for the costs we're talking about. I think that there could be some market pressure that might do some of that, and where there are some opportunistic ways to really take a few where it is affecting sort of that single family neighborhood, you know, but I don't know. I guess I just don't, I've never really totally understood this issue.
So to answer that directly, my neighborhood, I think, is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm.
I live in a historic neighborhood.
Mhm.
It's beautiful.
Right,
The
it is.
houses are
Right.
80 to 90 years old.
Mhm. Gorgeous.
And they're perfect for homeowners that
Mhm.
want to spend a bunch of money to keep their house up. They're not perfect for students, but we have 3 roads of the same exact beautiful craftsman-style houses that students rent, and they're slowly being destroyed. So that, if that neighborhood, and it already is, as Mrs. Drager pointed out, I think it is the pressure of all the new housing going in, making it, they have to lower the rents to rent these houses, where at least one of them, and maybe 2, is now more economical for them to sell it or rent it to somebody else at least. So I think it is possible. And
Yeah.
to say it'll never means that we should never try.
Right.
And it may not be worth the cost, is what you're
Yeah.
saying, and it might
Yeah.
be, so we'd have to see. The numbers that we have in the old memo from 1994 about the price that you could sell these houses at after they're rehabbed, I think is low.
Particularly in your neighborhood. I mean, I think your neighborhood is a good example.
Right.
And I think,
So
you know.
there was one in my neighborhood that I think they bought and they flipped and they sold it for, I think, $50,000 more than I paid for my house right down the street. So there is a market if you can turn them into a house to sell. I'm not sure how much that was, yeah.
Just sold again for $250.
$250, so $100,000 more than I bought for my house.
Eric?
So there's a lot of dynamics going on, and it's hard to, predictions are hard, especially about the future, right? So if, you know, depending on what happens with the downtown, if it continues to grow and we have more density there in an office building and the properties surrounding are going to become worth more as other uses than the uses that they are now being used as. And we don't know what those predictions are. I think that one thing that would be interesting, so we have a problem with these properties decaying over time. It's not like they're static, right? They're getting worse, and so something's going to happen, and we need to be thinking long-term to match where those houses are going to end up. We need to put something in place now that we're not asking in 20 years, these houses are falling down, what are we going to do? I think that the geography of these things is that there's an interface between the rental areas and the owner-occupied areas. They butt up against each other all the way around the campus and the downtown. And I think one of the things you could do is come up with some objective set of criteria to pick houses. For example, if we were going to go with a program for condemning rental licenses, so it's not optional, but we have the authority to go in and pay and require their rental license get expired. That's the only way I see this working. And we have some money from a developer who's gotten consideration via tax increment financing for eligible expenses, the way Ruth was. So we have a kitty to spend on this. So then we have an algorithm that identifies a bunch of eligible properties, and they're the ones where you could make the biggest difference, right? So they're the ones that butt up against owner-occupied areas, so that they're not the ones on Grand River Avenue, for example, right? Which are never going to be becoming anything else except commercial properties. So you identify based on an objective set of criteria which houses you want to target to expire rental licenses. And then you don't necessarily expire all of them, you just bring them into conformity, right? You just expire however many you need to get down to a conforming rental license. And then that just lowers the value of the property as a rental and makes it more likely that it's going to get used either as a family rental or because it's right next to an owner-occupied neighborhood, it's more likely to get bought and used as a home. And I'm not pretending that all of these homes are going to convert back to owner occupancy or family rental, but they might convert to something else, and we don't know what that is right now. It has to be compatible with the neighborhood, it has to be compatible with the downtown. But the larger issue is that I think this is a good direction to go in, even if we don't know exactly what's going to happen with some of these properties. But it would be useful to have, I think, if we were interested in going in this direction, an assessment of how many properties would be good candidates because they're up against an owner-occupied neighborhood or smack in the middle of one, to try to get a sense of how many rental licenses we would need to expire to make a difference and whether that balances out against the potential revenue from one of these TIF plans. And the only other thing I'll say is we really need to use tax capture to do this, because we can condemn these rental licenses at 25 cents on the dollar. We have to figure out a way to do that, otherwise I think it's just too expensive. So just
You're
for,
not factoring in legal costs there necessarily. When you're talking about that figure of the cost for condemnation, I mean, we have to figure in legal costs.
well, that's why I'm asking. That's why I'm asking how much, including legal costs, is the cost to condemn a rental license? And it might be twice as much as buying it on the open market. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But until we know
Yes,
that,
right.
then we have no idea. But if we can find a way to do this with tax capture, then that would leverage our funds by a lot.
George. So I just wanted to draw attention to the Capital Area Housing Partnership map and then that document there. It does show that the city has made, I think, substantial progress with Capital Area Housing Partnerships in the city over the past 20 years, perhaps it's longer. It's 100 houses that have been purchased and rehabbed for income qualified within the primarily near neighborhoods. Also, MSU's EHOP and the city's EHOP have been 50 houses purchased. Now, that's a very small investment on behalf of the city, a down payment assistance, then the house is deed restricted. So I do think that there are good programs that we can look to continue, that we're talking about 160 houses or some number like that between those two programs. And you're putting families or owner-occupied people into houses. So as Ruth is saying, if the prices typically for rentals do start to decline, is there an opportunity for more programs like this to be there while we're thinking of the perfect program, to think about other programs that still keep working and keep on, putting money aside for that? The city has been very cautious in the EHOP dollars because we've been tight budget, but perhaps expanding that and giving more home ownership opportunities to people, encouraging MSU to do the same, and also looking at the CHP to see if there's more opportunities, getting at the mayor's issue about income qualified opportunities to rehab houses that people want to get out of the rental business, and we can push these existing programs that have been good programs for us. When I got my first house in the city 20 years ago, I availed myself of the EHOP program to help me buy my first house. That was when you had to live in the city, so a little different time, but great program, and helps people buy in East Lansing. I've obviously been here ever since. So maybe that's an option we could look at as well, and have some good data on that.
Sure.
So, I mean, I just want to say, when I asked my question earlier, I don't mean this totally rhetorically. I think I see both the environmental value, right? I mean, these are old homes. We want to preserve them. They are close to campus. They are, close to major transportation hubs or downtown. But I just think there's this very fine line of balancing that for those very same reasons, they're also good student locations. So you lose the value in the house. They're not cared for as well. I mean, I think we can all just acknowledge that. Those are different kinds of renters, but it's also a good location for students in a lot of these spaces, and they are more affordable for rentals than a lot of what's coming online. And I think so when I ask this bigger question, I just want us to make sure we're being clear about, that there are trade-offs philosophically here with both of these things. And I don't want us to just have a preference and sort of, we only prefer owner-occupied and homeowners. We want both, and at the end of the day, what we really would like is, if these are going to be rental homes, I wish they weren't deteriorating. I wish they weren't being sort of managed and treated the way they are. I don't think we have enough controls to do that. I think we use a lot of our controls on pace and other things, and you still have this. So I'm in favor of what are some of these other levers that we can look at, and what are some of the ways to maybe juice that market if that market's already happening. I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of condemning rental licenses. I'm just a little uncomfortable with it, and I think that I'm mostly uncomfortable with it because I think it could be exorbitant in cost. I don't know. We don't know the answer, but I can imagine what some of those legal costs might look like.
Go ahead.
I just had a couple of points on this. So, and I won't talk about the overall concept. The one point that I'd want to make is I agree with Councilmember Draheim. I mean, we heard today some issues with some of our newer developments and costs associated with that. Houses in those neighborhoods provide for me, as well as a lot of other students, believe it or not, a more affordable option to live in East Lansing and live nearby to campus. Would I maybe have preferred to live in a new apartment? Sure, but I couldn't afford it. And so, that rent difference is not a $100 a month issue, it's several hundred. And so that's one point that I just wanted to throw out there. And the other point is, especially when we're talking about rentals. Family rentals is definitely something that I would like to see happen. I think when we talk about housing affordability in the city of East Lansing, we talk about, like, you know, who takes care of a home better, somebody that's there for a year, somebody that's going to be there for a long time. You know, we can put family rentals in that mix. And I think that kind of accomplishes both of the goals in a sense, because it opens it up for students, sure, to rent there, but, you know, we do have certain restrictions and certain rental licenses that are, you know, one family and an occupant, and others that, you know, leads you to believe, okay, maybe it's not going to be owner occupied, but it could be affordable for maybe a young family to move into that can't afford to buy the house for $250,000, but still wants to live in East Lansing, maybe works at the university. So it's just I'm happy to have this conversation because I think it's good. I think it's kind of been under the surface for a while. It's good to bring it out here, but I think there are a lot of factors in this.
Go ahead.
So that was actually exactly my point. These houses don't have to convert to owner occupancy.
No, I wasn't suggesting that. I wasn't.
And having them convert to family occupancy is fine. And I would like to see more MSU faculty and graduate students and MSU staff living close to campus too, because right now, I mean, they do, but I would like to have them to have the same opportunities to live across the street if they want. And if they want to take care of their yards and mow the grass and shovel the snow, then more power to them. And if people who don't want to do that have apartments to live in, then that's great. That's a match of supply and demand, and I think that's what we want. And if we need more affordable housing in apartments, then we need to build more apartments. And just because we had a debacle with one project doesn't mean that the next project is going to be a debacle. I've heard none of these stories. The landmark movement seems to have gone just fine. So why isn't that the model for this issue? So, I mean, we control the zoning and the projects that get built on a substantial amount of land right beside the campus. And we should leverage that, I think. And I think we need more apartment-style student housing across the street from campus. Maybe not in the downtown, but in the Delta Triangle along Bogue Street. And that will, unless I'm missing something basic about supply and demand, that's going to help drive down the prices of apartments where people want to live. So I don't think that the cost issue is more an issue of supply and demand in my mind. Go ahead, Sharon.
Just one last thing. As we're talking about this and doing a housing study, I do want to look at and whether we do find some kind of a survey mechanism too for whether that's students, well, it's students and families, because I think the other issue is sort of what type of property you want to live in. Not every student nor adult wants to live in a high-rise building. I mean, I lived in a house off campus when I lived here, and we did that because my roommate was from here and her parents had a dog that they couldn't keep at home, and she had her dog, and we barbecued, and it was great. We loved that house, you know. We took good care of it too. But there's also low-rise, you know, over by my neighborhood, over in that Delta Triangle, there's sort of low-rise apartment buildings that are garden-style apartments, you know, 2 levels, and some of them have, you know, patios outside, and they're lovely. I watched people moving into them this weekend, and so I think we just have to be cognizant that there are choices that people that are 18 to 24 want as well. And so when we're thinking about that control we have over zoning, making sure that it's not just all knee-jerk, like if we build more and it's all high-rise more, that's going to solve the problem. Because I think at the end of the day, part of the reason we still have a lot of rental houses is cost. And part of it is that some people just prefer, they're coming from a home and they want to live in a home. Like that's just what they're used to.
But we have some data now, right? And we know that the apartments that just opened up were a huge hit.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they sold out.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's demand for that.
Okay, so I've just got a couple of comments. I think we've heard from Annette previously that within the city, the single-family homes that are for rent generally fill up faster than the apartments do. I think when we do have a new product online, then you might see apartments fill up, a lot faster. And Ms. Drager's anecdotal comments about houses not being rented right away would indicate to me that, we've seen a little bit of shift here, but we don't know in terms of how long that's going to last and how that's going to happen. So going back to Shanna's original comment that asked the question, what's the plan here? What do we really want to do here? I think that's a critical question, both in terms of what we would do with a housing study, but what we could do in the long run. If the objective is to convert current rental houses to owner-occupied properties, then I don't think that's going to happen in, between Albert Street and Grand River. I don't, generally. And I don't think it's going to happen in the Delta Triangle or some of the other areas that have long since converted to rental properties. But there may be properties within those areas that are underutilized. And currently, we've got them all sort of zoned in the same way. So maybe we need to take a look at some additional zoning opportunity. So, we do have a university district zoning. I don't know, I can't remember whether we really use it or not, but maybe we need to take a look at something like that for the Delta Triangle. We did have a request, I want to say, 4 or 5 years ago from the Hagans, actually, with a property on Wolf Court. I think it had 6, it was licensed for 6. And they indicated that they would be interested in moving those licenses and turning that property over to CAHP so it could be redeveloped for family ownership. We don't have a program that can do that. And I would ask staff to see if there's a way to create something that allows us to shift some of the licenses, because that may be a lot cheaper than condemning property and doing things like that. So that's an issue that I'd like to see us explore. The geography of the plan, I think, is very important because, like I say, I think there are areas that are just not, why would we buy licenses in there? Because we're not going to really change anything. And I think, there's a program, and I think I've talked about this for the last, 15 years, but there's a program in Shaker Heights, Ohio, where the city itself communicates with landlords to find available housing for families within the community, low to moderate income families generally. And then people can go to this one-stop shop at the city hall and they will be referred to the landlord to find appropriate housing. I still think we should look at something like that. I realize that might be more than we actually have the personnel capable of doing, but I think that's another option that we should take a look at. But I think what we have before us is, do we want a housing study? And for me, I say yes. So I don't know, I don't think we vote on it or anything like that, but it's certainly, we think that something should be presented to us so that we can take a vote on it and authorize it. George, you had some comments too.
That there actually was a model program, a pilot program we developed, I think in 2013 or 14, that looked at the transfer of rental licenses from different areas. So we could actually just sort of dust that off and see if it's something that council wants to take a look at. We've already done the work on it, at least just to see if that's something that you were thinking of. But we certainly also understand that a housing study at this point is what you want to do. The DMB, I think, DDA also wants to do one, and our partners in Lansing and Meridian Township are looking at it. So at this point, we can look to bring an actual RFP and move forward with that, bring it back to council when it comes time for approval on a housing study.
Can I ask George a question?
Yeah.
If it's okay with the rest of council, could you also look at proposals to enhance our own program? I mean, how would we make the or the L cap and the MSU cap and the other cap more? I mean, how much would it cost to make those more
Yes, we have been
attractive?
we've been extremely sparse in funding those programs over the last several years. So now, as things ease up, I would certainly like to be able to make a recommendation to do more of those.
Right. How much would that cost to do this many houses? Because I didn't realize we had done 150. This is not nothing. This is significant.
Right.
I mean, if we could do another 100, that would be huge.
Yeah, and Capital Area Housing Partnerships gets a big source of the credit as well. I mean, the city partnered with them, and they've done a great job.
Yeah.
As the mayor knows, the mayor was on the, I think you still serve on the board, right, Mayor? Right. So they do a great job as well, but we had a stronger emphasis when we had more funds.
Right.
And now it'd be great to be able to reinvigorate that.
Maybe take advantage of sort of new leadership at MSU to talk to them about investing a little bit more in this program also.
Yeah, so part of the thing was they were investing in it, and we were so so pared back at how much we were investing that it made them pare back as well. So now, I think naturally they have a lot of demand because a lot of faculty are hired and they want to live near the campus and they want to walk.
Yeah.
So I think that any dollars that we put into the program have a multiplying effect by them being able to do more still. So that's what we certainly want to do, is look at how much we can do. I think it was some modest amount, like I think the number was $5,000 in homeowner assistance, and then the university was doing quite a bit more for a larger number of employees. So certainly, that multiplying effect is something we'd like to look at and see what we can try to do.
And, I mean, they have their own issues. They have parking congestion on campus, and this kind of thing would help with that. And so it's actually not a bad investment for them to spend a little bit of money trying to get faculty to live close to
Oh,
campus.
and environmentally, it's great value because then you have people who are walking to work or riding a bike instead of driving. So, I mean, it has a lot of great benefits to it. Stabilizing neighborhoods,
So also, Mayor Pro Tem, if we could figure out a way to leverage this money with the TIF, and instead of buying rental license, just contribute to the down payment assistance
Great.
and the,
That might be even more effective.
yeah, because then we could get some low-income rental housing as well. It
Right.
wouldn't have to be owner-occupied.
I just want to point out, the only reason I brought up condemnation is because if you're relying on people to voluntarily give up licenses, then that's a variable that just makes it really hard to predict what's going to happen, right? And so if we have if what we wanted to do was target specific areas for conversion, then it seems like you have to do something like condemnation, because otherwise you can't rely on people to voluntarily give up licenses. That's the only reason I raised it. I'm not saying it's an attractive or certainly not an inexpensive option, but if there are other options, then that's even better.
Annette, any last thing?
No, I took notes. I'll have to pull out, I think I studied Shaker Heights almost 20 years ago upon your request.
Might have been that, yes.
But I might have recycled that, so we'll start over.
Okay.
But I think we might possibly even have an old draft ordinance about the transferring of rental licenses, so we can get all that back out.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
Sure.
So this question that Shannon had that you all agree, I think is a really good one. What are we going for? I think what a lot of people in neighborhoods like mine and Ruth's are going for is being able to sleep at night. And I have to say, we think about that as conversion, but our current police force, and this started under Jeff Murphy, have been very community-oriented, and they've been really good at managing noise, much better than in past years. So I think some of this, we should be thinking about ways other than housing to deal with quality of life issues in housing. So I would say there are a lot of laws that we could, including laws about not letting historic district houses degrade. Landlords are not allowed to do that, nor are homeowners. So we can be using the laws that already exist to improve quality of life. And I think sometimes we're not aggressive enough about that. And this year I've been much more aggressive because we have 2 families in the neighborhood going through cancer treatments. They need their sleep. And I've just been much more aggressive about asking the police to assist with that. And the police have been, as always, great about that.
No, that's a good suggestion. There is a provision in the historic district statute and ordinances with regard to demolition by neglect, and maybe we need to sort of pick up on making sure that that's not happening within our community. All right, the next agenda item is proposed changes to rental overlays. Councilmember Draheim.
Sure. It's a good segue because we're kind of still talking about this. So we had chatted about, we had 2 recent rental overlay districts proposed and approved by this council in the last, 6 months or so. Maybe a little further apart than that. And during those discussions, we talked a lot about this issue about rental housing and the need to have rental housing that is not sort of this traditional yearly churn of student housing necessarily, but being able to ensure that there is rental housing available for families, maybe students, but maybe longer term students, a graduate student who might want to stay for a couple years, that kind of thing in particular. But in our last conversation about it, I was just uncomfortable with, we're sort of approving these because the way our rental overlay district is written, ordinance is written, it's like if a neighborhood wants to do it, they get a percentage of the signatures, and we can disprove that, but there's a feeling that if they've done their work, we should be granting that. And I think we have different philosophies on whether that works. But I think at the end of the day, there was a lot of conversation about the demand and the pressure for like houses converting over to rental in a massive way is less north of Saginaw. And so after that meeting, I talked a little bit with Councilmember Byer and talked to our city attorney about what changes could we potentially make that might help provide some still rental options in those areas north of Saginaw, and provide some flexibility for people who are, own a property, maybe are leaving that property for sabbatical, which we currently have, but maybe they're leaving because and the market's just not good and they can't sell it at the time. And what could we do for the rental overlay to still allow for like maybe the least restrictive of the overlays north of Saginaw? And so what Tom drafted was exactly that. It's a change that basically, let me pull it up, for properties north of Saginaw, they would only be allowed to apply or to petition for an RO3, which basically still says you have to be living on the you have to, as a homeowner, still have to be living on the property, but you can have a room, or you can rent a room in your house. So it still provides a little bit of opportunity for, say, graduate students who might need rental housing or things like that, just to kind of help keep a more fluid rental market. And then the other change that he made was when we were talking about the exemptions, we have in there language around house sitting. And currently, if you look on our application, it allows for house sitting. So if you're going to be gone from your property for sabbatical or for 6 months' time for something else, or you're traveling, you're retired, whatever, you can allow somebody to house sit, and you have to kind of, as part of the application, you're like signing an affidavit that they're just house sitting and that you're planning to come back. But the reality is for a lot of folks, they may have reasons that they're leaving for a year and coming back, and in some cases they may just not know quite what they want to do yet. They may be leaving, they may be considering a job opportunity. We've had a couple friends where this has happened. They have decided to take a risk on a job and move to another city, and they wanted to keep their house because they want to keep roots in East Lansing. They weren't really sure it was going to work. One who jokingly was getting married, and she was like, I don't know if I really want to sell my house, But I think that this comes up, and it comes up for people sometimes, when the market isn't great either, and it's like, I don't want to sell it. So basically what our current ordinance allows is that a homeowner can do this for 2 in any 5-year period. So it doesn't allow it to convert fully to a rental. It can't stay a rental. This just takes out the requirement that you have to sort of sign on your affidavit that you just have somebody house sitting your house.
Before you leave that,
Mhm.
are they allowed to charge rent to the house sitter?
I think so. Are they in it?
Yes.
Yeah.
There, so
Yeah.
they just can't, it says you can't have without a rental license, but you can still have a contract with a renter.
Right.
A lease.
Correct.
Yeah, that's the word.
Thank you.
But they don't go through our rental license
Right.
process.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Mhm. Am I characterizing all the rest of that correctly in that? Like the temporary versus like sort of what the application is, they basically, it says that they are coming back.
Right. I review those, and often I end up talking to those people who turn in the house sitting application form, and we put the ordinance language right on there so they know what they're signing up for essentially, and do have a conversation with them about, do you plan to come back? I mean, we all know life happens, but is the plan to come back? That's always been a part of it. And so, that has to be the case. I have people that call me and just kind of ask questions about it, and if they say, well, or if their house is currently for sale, then I often tell them, well, that would not lead itself to meet the spirit of our ordinance, because if your house is for sale, it would not appear that you intend to come back.
In my view, the reason that I'm suggesting this change is, particularly as we saw in the last recession, and as we potentially go into another recession here, is sometimes that does happen. Sometimes somebody has a house for sale and the market is slow, and it's like, do we want property values getting depressed by them doing quicker sales, or do we want to allow them to have somebody in there for 6 months if they can rent it for 6 months?
So when you take out the word temporary, that means that
It means that when Annette no longer is asking them, do you
Okay.
plan to come back?
Gotcha.
So they're still restricted. They can't get a rental license. They can
Right.
still not do it for more than 2 more years. It doesn't take away any of it. It doesn't change anything except for people's maybe honesty about it, and our requirement that they, like we just giving them that flexibility to say, for whatever reason, like I'm gonna go move down to Florida for a year to take care of my mom, and I'm
Right.
planning to come back, but I don't know, maybe I won't, and right now, what they would do is say to them, no, I don't plan to come back.
Well, that's still in here. So we're taking the word temporary out, but you still have to identify the projected duration of the owner's absence. So that means temporary, even if we didn't use the word. And so there really is no change here by taking out the word temporary.
Well, I think it would still allow it, though. I mean, if the owner says the projected duration is, I'm gonna take advantage of 2 years, I'm gonna be gone for 2 years, or I'm gonna sell it in the interim, I think we're just not required.
I don't think if I'm gonna sell it in the interim, that wouldn't qualify for this, even with the word temporary out of here.
Well, I think that's the intent. That's what Tom was trying to do here. So if we need to fix that wording, then I think that's fine. But I think it's,
Right, well,
I
I'm
think
not
the
sure.
idea.
I mean, I'm not
well,
sure
I know
I
you're
agree with that.
not sure you
but
support it, but I think
I'm
the
just
idea
telling you
here
that
is, right.
Taking the word temporary
Right.
out of here just doesn't get
Right.
you where you want to go.
Right.
Okay.
And it's still keeping it to the other restrictions, right? So it's 2 unrelated individuals or a
Right.
family.
2 years and 5-year period.
Mhm.
Projected duration of the absence,
Mm-hmm.
it's a temporary, whether you use the word temporary or not, the language of this says it's got to be temporary. So if that's going to change, then this needs a bigger change.
Oh,
Go ahead.
That's it for me. Those are my suggested changes.
Go ahead.
So I thought a lot about this. So I need you I need to be convinced, because I live in an area with a rental overlay, and without that, I don't think I would have ever been able to buy my house, because there would have been rentals, it would have moved all the way up probably to Saginaw. And maybe over Saginaw, I don't know. So there are areas that you think do need a rental overlay, and those are basically the ones south of Saginaw.
Yeah, and I actually think even north of Saginaw, there's some argument to be made.
Okay.
But just less restrictive. But
when you're saying less restrictive, it's basically no overlay, right?
no, north of Saginaw, they could apply for an RO3.
Which is?
You still have to live in the house, but you can rent a room.
Owner residing can rent or lease to one person.
So it's still taking away, you live north of Saginaw, your neighborhood wants to do this, you would still be restricted from
You can have a
being
room.
able to leave and rent your house.
Right.
It's just saying, it's just keeping the rental market a little more fluid there. And personally, that was a little bit of a compromise. I would love to find a system where we'd have to sort of show demonstrated, like, that there's a lot of conversion happening in a neighborhood. But when I talked to the city attorney about it, that's a very gray, squishy line, and so this was sort of the next best alternative. This might open up some rental opportunities for people, for rooms or accessory dwelling,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. In a perfect world, might want to see some further conversation around what's happening with conversion and the need for rental overlay here, but I don't necessarily view this as the biggest deal of a change. I think language needs to be changed around the temporary. I think that makes sense. I think that's kind of more just a life thing. I think if you move away, for a little bit to take care of a loved one, or you're on sabbatical, a job that's supposed to be temporary turns into permanent. I think that's just kind of a life thing. So, I mean, I don't have any problem with that change whatsoever. And then, still being allowed to do an RO3. I mean, an RO3 is pretty restrictive, right? That doesn't mean it means there's not going to be a rental home there. There's going to be maybe a roomer. So I don't view this as that significant of a change.
Well, I guess I see it as a pretty significant change, but an RO3 is probably the least restrictive version of the overlay, and we have a number of neighborhoods that have adopted that RO3 restriction. But the RO2 is, just barely different. It's, the RO2 is the current resident can get a Class 1 license. When they move or sell their house, there's no license on that property anymore. So it's sort of the same thing as the RO3. It's a little bit different. And the RO1 is the most restrictive, which is you can't rent within this neighborhood. But even looking at, when you proposed this, I just wanted to look at the map. And so what we're looking at north of Saginaw is really, I will just say that the property that would not be subject to an overlay at this point in time, just off of State Road where they're building all those condos, the condo master deed and bylaws are going to determine how you can rent in there. So we're probably not going to see an overlay in there anyway. The same thing's true of the property that is the condominiums just off of Coleman Road by Coolidge Road. Those are all condos. They're going to be governed by a master deed and bylaws. George's neighborhood is actually a condominium project with an HOA. And I'm sure that their master deed and everything in there is governing what's rentable in there. There's a couple of, I think there's some duplexes in there that are rented. But we're really looking at this impacting northern Pinecrest more than anything else. And actually, southern Shaw Estates, which now has the overlay district north on the northern part, but not the southern part.
And parts of Harrison.
Right across the street, you could have any kind of overlay district that you wanted. And the same thing's true of what I guess I'd call eastern Glencairn there, which doesn't currently have an overlay, although they've talked about it several times. So I'm not clear what we're accomplishing here. I mean, it's sort of like the last discussion, which is I'm not sure what the plan is here. If we have no clue as to whether this is going to open up family rentals or things like that, and we're really just limiting it to roomers, getting a license so you can have a roomer, I just don't see why we'd be doing this. This seems like a little bit anti-democratic. This is the right of self-determination that was handed off to neighborhoods. And we do have the choice to not accept what they do. We can even if we were to eliminate this, we could impose this overlay district on this entire northern tier at our whim, I guess, because basically we have the right to do that under the Zoning Enabling Act. So we could change the zoning to prohibit rentals in the northern tier because that's exactly what we were told by the Court of Appeals when they upheld the overlay districts when they were challenged in court. So I just don't see what we're accomplishing by doing this.
Well, I think the intent here is to ensure that we don't, I think it's more properties than you think, and I agree, it's not a ton, but one, I haven't looked through all those HOA things, but I certainly know in White Hills that doesn't govern that, because there are some rentals in White Hills.
Well, they were existing rentals. There is an overlay zone that covers White Hills.
That could be. But
it doesn't take care.
But I think you're making
all existing rentals stay in place.
Right.
When you
This
do
isn't
have an
changing any of
overlay.
the existing overlay. And I think you're making, the point I'm making is that we have a constricted amount of rentals we just sat here and talked a lot about student rentals and sort of, I'm defining two different things, right? I'm defining sort of undergraduate, fast churn, year in, year out, students who are living in different places for those 3 or 4 years versus potentially family rentals, single family homes, which I know this doesn't address, and also just other people who are coming here for work, people who are coming here as maybe graduate students, maybe students, maybe an undergrad student, but who don't want to live in, necessarily in a group house and can't afford an apartment. And so sometimes one-room rentals are a very affordable way for a student to come and live. And so what I think makes me uncomfortable is as we see more and more neighborhoods saying we're going to put these rental overlays on, I feel like there's a little bit of like, oh, suddenly there's a rental license and it's hard for me to not feel, I get what you're saying about it being anti-democratic, but we have to see the bigger city policy issue. They bubble it up from the neighborhood level, and we have to look at the big picture. And across the board in our community, there are two things at play here that make me uncomfortable. I think we know that there is, at least anecdotally, maybe the housing study will help us understand this more, but some interest in non-sort of traditional student housing. And I think it's uncomfortable to me when we have neighborhoods who are saying, oh, we have one rental license. We're making an assumption that that's going to turn the neighborhood into shit. And so we're going to like put a rental overlay. And so the attempt of this was just to sort of say, there isn't the same kind of pressure for housing conversion to rentals that is north of Saginaw as there is south of Saginaw. And so if this opens up some opportunities for a homeowner up there to make a little extra money by renting out a roomer, to have a roomer, it just doesn't allow for a neighborhood to say you can't do that. When I think it's in our interest as a city to ensure that we have a range of housing types and affordable housing. And I think right now, I do think this is a minor change. I think there's not a huge amount of properties that it affects, but I think it would help. I think it would help with those neighborhoods saying, well, we don't have an interest in doing this.
So when we talked about this, I was under the impression that your ordinance was going to be what you took out, which was you're going to say north of Saginaw there couldn't be any more rental overlays. Mm-hmm. And you backed off on that?
Well, when I had originally talked to the city attorney about it, it was sort of like to say none felt a little dramatic to me given the conversation here. And so what I had proposed was, could we do something where if a neighborhood wanted to do it, they have to sort of show a study that, there's been 3 or 4 applications, we're hitting a saturation point. And I think he just was like, that it could be done. And he said it could be done. If we want to go that way, we could do it that way. He said it's just, writing that and figuring out what that trigger point is takes a little bit more, a little more effort. And if we want to do that, I'm open to that. I just think we're going to have to think about that so let's take the most recent example. If it's a smaller area, so if it's a percentage of, if you say, well, no more than, 5% of the houses in the area, you haven't had more than 5% of the houses in the area apply for a rental license or something like that. Well, then they just make it smaller and they're coming, so it's.
Do we have a demand? Do we know anything about demand for rooms? Is there not enough supply of rooms?
I don't know that we totally know that. I mean,
maybe
I think the
we need to
housing
find that out before we tell people that they can't do any kind of overlay except for this, because I've never heard of a demand for rooms. And I know just rooms.
I could say anecdotally, Airbnb issue is one that we obviously talk about a lot, but they tend to be the people that if you're trying to rent a room for a longer period of time, that's where you go through. I know all of my friends that are in grad school, if they're not wanting to live in either $1,500 a month apartment or in what is traditionally student undergrad housing, that's what they're doing.
But they're doing that, if they do that right now, they can do that right now north of Shaw, right?
They could, unless they came in and did the same thing, but they couldn't in that one that just passed, right?
That wasn't me giving any data, but
that doesn't allow any of that. So this is sort of meant to say, okay, we don't really know, right? The housing study, maybe we do a housing study, we do this, but my discomfort is we're sort of allowing more and more constriction on the types of renters and rental investments that we want. And sometimes those are folks that might rent a room and they might become the next homeowner purchaser. They may want to stay here. And I feel like we're just not providing enough opportunities in this community for those first hits. My preference would be to open up more of that to single family and just restrict it altogether north of Saginaw, or to put a moratorium on these until we do the housing study or something like that, until we get a little sense of this. But I feel like it feels a little reactionary, right? Like one rental license comes in and it's like, oh God, we got to do an overlay because the whole neighborhood's going to go to tenants.
I do see the rest of East Lansing. I mean, that has happened.
I know, and I get it. And I mean, listen, I live in a student, but that's the whole point I'm making. Is I think that pressure for that kind of mass conversion is just not existent and is not as existent north of Saginaw.
And this is the part where I needed you to convince me. Well, that's just your feeling.
Well, I think, no, it's not. I mean, the last time when we were talking about this, and Annette brought data, we were talking about the number of applications that came. I can't remember what it was, but it was the number of people even applying for rental licenses was not that high in north of Saginaw. Like, so, but one comes and the neighborhood thinks that, and, you know, and the same thing happened in Chartwell Carriage, which again is an HOA, and you say, well, the covenants cover it, but it didn't cover it, and so that's why they went with this mechanism, and so.
Chartwell doesn't have, an overlay. It's got, on Lakeside and the next street, that's not an overlay area.
They have an overlay district. We approved an overlay in
No,
Chartwell. That was
we
the
approved it
second.
for a very small portion of that area that is owner-occupied, single-family homes.
They're not the condos?
No,
Yeah,
the
okay.
condos
Well, they're
are up
okay.
here.
But
which is not-
they're in that area of Chartwell Carriage.
Oh,
I agree.
okay.
Okay. I just, to me, this feels like a way
The yellow would
to
be
say,
where this would apply.
we're making sure that there's this opportunity. It's, it keeps intact the rental overlay. It's not ignoring, particularly where we know, has historically been more pressure for, when this ordinance was introduced. I mean, I think you use your neighbor as an example. My neighbor's another example. Yours is too. I mean, there was real pressure and real conversion happening, and for all the reasons in the conversation we just had, I just am not sure that we're seeing that, but I do think we're seeing some reactionary, like, oh God, one rental license means everything's gonna go to hell. And so that makes me nervous that we're then passing policies that from there on out, that neighborhood is restricting that, and we can't, and that's it. That whole parcel of neighborhood is now off the market for potential rentals that could be used for, families that wanna rent, or, single people that wanna come in and live in our community. And
That's exactly the point of this ordinance. That's exactly the point of this ordinance. I don't know what problem we're fixing with this. I have no idea. And I want the word temporary in there, because temporary sends the message that this is temporary. And this is to accommodate things like sabbaticals and family travel, and the assumption is you're going to come back. And if you don't, then that's just the cost of doing business, and that's part of built in. That's what you knew when you bought a house in this area with an overlay. A few years ago, I think late 2012, early 2013, there was a proposal to add another exemption for people who are trying to sell a house. And the idea was that if you had a hard time selling your house, then you could rent it, which didn't actually make any sense, because it makes it harder to sell a house if it's full of tenants. And among the other problems is you could just price it so nobody would buy it. And so then what you ended up with it was essentially an unlicensed rental. And people figured that out pretty quickly, and this courtroom was full of people in reaction to that. And the people who were interested in making this amendment to the ordinance sort of recognized that this was a mistake, and they backed off, so it didn't happen. But
you could still only do that for
I'm
2
not-
to 5 years.
Yeah, I'm not quite done. The problem with tweaking these ordinances is that you don't know what's going to happen. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And these ordinances have worked fine. This ordinance has worked fine for a long time, and I don't want to tweak it, because I think what's going on here is this is an effort to open up more neighborhoods to rentals. And people have said that that's not what they want. And we've got a lot of rentals in East Lansing right now. And the challenge for us should be to figure out how to use those in a way that meets the demand. So converting student rentals to family rentals is, I think, a really worthwhile goal. But we fought hard. People fought hard to protect owner-occupied neighborhoods in this city, and I think that's something I want to respect. And at least 3 of us live in areas that have been protected by this ordinance, and I'm not inclined to fiddle with it at all.
Good.
I just want to say, I don't think it has worked fine in every case. I think there has been a lot of amazing things that this ordinance has done, and I'm not in any way suggesting we upend it or way overturn it. I think there have been problems sometimes with the ordinance when people either A, want to move, and maybe they have to move quicker than they can even sell their house or be ready to do that, when they are
This
making
doesn't solve
decisions.
that problem.
Huh?
Yours
The
doesn't-
temporary part of it would, right? If I had to move for a job next week or next in 2 weeks, right? We have friends that they just picked up and moved to Florida. Literally, she got a job, they picked up. They are in the process right now of trying to figure out what are we gonna do? Like they're
Gotcha.
they're not here.
Gotcha.
She would love to rent her house. She can rent her house because where she is. So she's like, we're gonna rent it for a year and then we're gonna turn around and sell it. We're gonna come back up and, deal with it. But she's just started a new job. So that's the perfect case. Let's just say I'm a faculty member, I'm getting an appointment here, I'm coming either ahead of my family or by myself, I'm a young faculty member. I want to live near campus, or I want to live at least, sort of in East Lansing. I don't want to live in the hub. I don't want to live in a full house by myself. I would love to rent a room, and we have friends who have done this, who've had, a professor or somebody living with them. And in some of these areas where we have now permitted these changes, particularly north of Saginaw, they can't do that. Those homeowners cannot now, in Shaw Estates, cannot rent out a room in their home, even when their 3 kids go off to college and they're living in some of those beautiful 5 and 6 bedroom homes in Shaw Estates. They cannot rent a room.
But that's what they chose to do when they picked the overlay.
They did, I agree, but I'm saying, so that's part of the issue. We as the city have to look bigger. I think that you have some of those property owners who are being a little reactionary, and frankly, I'm uncomfortable with the notion about renters, and I think that's what it's coming from. I realize that this fix here does not fix the whole single family thing, but it does at least send to me the signal that this was meant to address a certain thing, which was significant conversion of owner-occupied areas into rental properties, and that is not a pressure or a threat in the northern tier, or in the north of Saginaw. I do not see it.
Can I get one piece of data?
Yeah.
From Annette? Annette, what was the last overlay that we approved besides the one we just approved? Do you remember?
Right, the Shaw Estates one, and then Hawthorne.
Which one?
Hawthorne.
Hawthorne. Okay, so, and that was 2 years?
Hawthorne was like a year and a half.
A year and a half ago. Okay, so, and before that, do you have, I'm just testing you now.
Yes, you are.
Alice, how old is Oakwood?
There are 19 total. I think Oakwood did ours about probably 7 years ago.
Okay, so just 7 years ago. So here's my issue. Ordinance 900 is quite old. And we, even in Oakwood, which is right next to the university basically, or houses that have already been converted, didn't do an overlay till 7 years ago because we saw that marching, I guess. I wasn't there at the time. But that was happening. And maybe 5 years before that, council would have been sitting right up here and say that's never going to happen in Oakwood because it's only happened in Bailey. So I see more and more students maybe wanting to go north of Saginaw, and maybe landlords taking advantage of that. I think your assumption isn't correct, that it's just based on a feeling. Because it could well be that one rental would lead to 2 rentals, which would lead to 5 rentals, and that's what that neighborhood was trying to prevent.
So how do we fix that?
Yeah, that's what I thought you were trying to fix.
So I'm happy to try to figure out how to fix that.
Yeah.
Could I ask a question of Ruth then? Maybe?
Yes.
So, and this could just be pure ignorance, but I don't know how this ordinance with this change for letting an RO3 rental overlay still happen would help landlords. Like if a neighborhood wanted to go and do an RO3 rental overlay, I mean, they couldn't, convert all of those to company-owned rental properties, right? They would
Right.
still have the overlay. So, I mean, this ordinance wouldn't allow that, right? It would still allow this. Maybe from what I'm understanding, it would just allow constant, if you're rumors, right?
Right, but the presumption that if a neighborhood wants an overlay because they don't want houses to convert, and you're going to say no, and in fact, you can't have that, and you are still allowed to have a roomer. They're not going to have a roomer. They don't want renters. That's the whole point. I mean, if they want to have a rental overlay, we either could say, and this is what I asked you, you either have to say, no, you can't have it. That way they can't bring it to us and ask. But we're not doing that in this ordinance, so I was ready to argue with you about the other ordinance, not this one, so.
Well, I guess I asked the same question that Aaron did. Like, they would still, this does still give them a rental overlay. This is still democracy they'll do. They can still have this. It's just saying that we as a city and see the need as a city policy to make sure that we are offering a lot of different diverse types of housing at different price points. And that some of the issues and some of the discomfort that I have about people's sort of perceptions of who's allowed to live in what neighborhood.
That's the part I don't understand. Why is
I
it,
feel that.
why are people's perceptions about what they think is going to happen in their neighborhood, why does that make you uncomfortable?
Because I think sometimes when these have been brought, they are brought because for less concern about, oh, suddenly we're gonna have a lot of houses converting, and it's, we don't want renters, because they have a preconceived notion about what a renter is.
But their preconceived notion comes from living in East Lansing and seeing what a renter is.
Okay, but our job is to help them understand that not all renters are doing beer bongs in their front yard and having parties. That
Yes,
rent-
they
No,
are.
they are not, and that
Come
is
to
the
my
point I'm
neighborhood.
trying to make.
They all
They
are.
aren't, and
The
that is the
girls
point I'm
do,
trying to
the
make.
boys
We are
do.
leaders, we are policymakers, and our job is to help people understand that that isn't the case. And so there are lots of renters who want to live in this city with their kids, with their family, with their, maybe they're just themselves, and they want those opportunities. And we are allowed, as we allow these, and I know there's not huge demand, I know people aren't knocking on our door, but what are we gonna do the next one? So we've had this, and you say, maybe I don't wanna vote for this. But say in 3 weeks, or say it's in 3 months, another one comes and it's Harrison Meadows, and they say, we wanna do it here too. Do you feel at all uncomfortable with that? Like if in your head you feel at all squeamish because they said, oh, one person came and applied for a rental license and we don't want them, we don't want that because renters don't keep up their property and renters don't do good things, and I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm uncomfortable with the implication, and I'm not like
So you're-
attributing ill intent. I'm just saying there is a preconceived notion and it's a negative one. It's a very NIMBYism type thing, and our job as leaders is to help people get over that.
What you're leaving out here is the economics, is the demand for students is so high that you're not, a landlord is not going to choose to rent to a low-income family when they can rent to 5 students. That's the problem.
Particularly when the supply is constrained.
Right, but we do have a constrained supply. It's a strange place in East Lansing.
It is, I
because
know.
40,000 people want to
Yep.
live in these houses. So I think that if you could somehow restrict it to the kind of people you wanted, which if we could do it for low-income rentals only or something like that, then that would be, I think, a reasonable policy. But to think if you allow renters, it's going to be anything but students within 3 miles of the university, I think I think that's unlikely.
I think a border, I think if you're allowing, if you're an R3 and you have a roomer, I think that's
All
not.
right, I think we've talked it through.
Okay, can I just say one other thing on the
Sure,
temporary
You can
side?
say whatever you want, you can talk all night.
So the temporary, the issue around the temporary helps get at that too. It allows some of these homes to say, you are not going to convert, you are not going to become a rental property, you are not getting a rental license. But if there is a reason why you cannot live in your house, and I know several people who are going through this right now who were not able to do it, they didn't meet the house sitting requirements, but they clearly could have had somebody renting their house for the year or so while they were making some other decisions. And they would have either maybe moved back because they were trying to figure this out, or they might have sold it at the end of that time because they were having some of these issues, and they just didn't. So the property either sat there while they're figuring this out, or, and so in the meantime, we know that people move into this community and would love to rent while they're looking for a home to own. And there are options there. And I just think this temporary side of this is changing very little, other than you don't have to lie to Annette when she asks those questions. Or have a for sale sign out in front of your yard.
Okay, so I'll just make a couple of comments, and we can, I assume you want this on the agenda for when?
Do you want to wait till after the housing study?
I would be willing to wait for the housing study if people would consider on the business agenda putting a moratorium on overlay districts.
I'm not going to agree to that personally. I guess if we could put that on the agenda, if you want it on the agenda, but.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd have 3 votes for a moratorium.
Are there other solutions that you can think of that, because the housing study may be a year away?
All right, well, why don't we just put this on the agenda for, say, we can do it next week or the week after?
Let's go the week after.
Okay, the 16th? Is that the 16th of the next one? 17th? 17th. Okay, and just a couple of comments here. With regard to the temporary, I really don't see any reason to change that, but I think what you're really shooting for is not the change in this, it's to permit, if you're trying to sell your house and you've already made a decision, you're moving out of the city, the ability, after a certain period of time, if your house doesn't sell right away, because frankly, our houses sell really fast, but if we put a time period, if your property has been on the market for a period of time, you can rent it, for a period of time. I think that would be a more appropriate sort of change to accomplish the objective you are, and I think we should take a look at that. I don't know how we would necessarily do that, but I think we could talk that through. As far as the other, I just can't support the change. This was part of a comprehensive plan to first, with Ordinance 900, reduce the spread of rental housing into neighborhoods. We found that wasn't necessarily functioning completely well. And so we went to the overlay zones to specifically let neighborhoods decide their own fate, or give them the opportunity to. And many chose to, and many have never done anything with regard to it. The fact that they're now waking up to it, I don't think is necessarily because they're concerned about students moving into the neighborhood, or particularly that there's a certain type of long-term rental in the neighborhood. I think it's Airbnb that has prompted a lot of the concerns with regard to this. And we as a city have opposed the current legislation that strips us of our authority to regulate rentals within our community. And part of the reason is because these houses in the northern tier would be more appropriate actually for Airbnb activity. And that can be hugely disruptive to a neighborhood, even if it's only one property within the neighborhood. So I think that's more of it. In terms of the temporary nature of that provision that we were talking to, I just want to also mention that, with other rentals, we do an all trades inspection. We require the upgrade of the property to make sure it's safe for the people who are going to be living there. We don't require that for the house sitting provision, and that's a significant change. So I think if we restrict that in some way for that rental circumstance that you're talking about, I think that can work. But I really don't think that we should be avoiding making sure that a house is safe for somebody to live in, and that's what we do for rental properties for sure. So anyway, that's my comments on it. We'll have it on the agenda for the 17th. All right, the next item on the agenda is Historic District Guidelines. I know who's making the presentation on that. Come on up.
Good evening. So I'm Jake Parcell. For those of you who don't know, I'm your city's Historic Preservation Officer, in addition to being one of the planners. First and foremost, thank you for bringing this up. I reviewed everything, and I think that the changes to the ordinance and the concerns raised here are definitely very, very helpful. It'll help us go a long way in what we're trying to accomplish as well. We just for some background, got a full board again for the first time, I think in March this year. We appointed our 7th member. So we've started to really tackle our administrative portion of the board for the first time since I've been in this role. We have our bylaws up for your consideration on your agenda next week, and we're starting to bring them into conformity with what is in the ordinance for Chapter 20 for historic preservation. And now we're starting to kind of tackle what is going on with our ordinance and what is going on with our web outreach. I think my vice chair did a really wonderful job of kind of explaining to you somewhat of what we're doing, but I think it's a little difficult for what we do to encompass just about everything in materials we have, because it is a case-by-case basis. So a lot of what we do is consulting with me before they turn in an application or explore their options. To go over the form here that was in the packet, number 1, the lack of clarity in the Historic District Ordinance and online resources regarding process and allowable activities. We do have something for the city called our Historic District Commission policies. I don't believe these were ever formally adopted for a pass out or a handout. In the meeting minutes for where these were drafted and adopted, which is prior to me starting here, the then chair, who's no longer on the board and former staff person, said they believe this is kind of just a resource for staff and for the commission to use to determine administrative approvals and compliance and things like that. So I do use this when I go through my approvals and help me evaluate each process. What we're starting to do is turn this document into something that everyone can have on a handout. If I know 2 of you do live in a historic district, you get a mailing from us each year. And we have recently gotten some more resources from, I think this is Detroit, from some of our commissioners. So we're starting to retool that, put the information from our policy into there, and then put that on the web as well. It's just a time-consuming process. So we're getting there slowly but surely. And I think that helps cover some of the part of our outreach. As for the energy and everything like that, I do agree with my vice chair. We have seen a lot of that coming up in our historic districts, specifically Chesterfield Hills, which is more owner-occupied. I think that it's good that we're on the cutting edge or before the more people start to implement that. So I will bring what you put in the draft ordinance, I believe Councilmember Draham wrote it, to our commission, and we'll start to work on crafting that. We have a few ordinance changes we wanted to make anyways for quorum purposes, so we'd like to just fold that all into one ordinance change so that we don't have to spend a lot of time, with you guys going through one section at a time. We can try and comprehensively do it all at once.
I should just give a caveat that was my language on that draft. That's not Tom's language. So I didn't want him to spend time on it until it had gone through them. So
yep, no
just
problem.
so you know, it is not.
I'll kind of take some of the concerns that I've seen here in our new bylaws once they're adopted, barring any changes next week, and roll that into our ordinance, and then also take some of the verbiage from Chapter 2 of our Code of Ordinances, which is the boards and commissions, and try and make one comprehensive ordinance adoption for you guys so you can kind of review it all at once. Our goal was for the end of the year for that, with the bylaws just being finished. That's next up. And then by our December mailing, we hope to have some of these policies more available online and in the mailing to go out to all of the historic homes.
Okay, any questions? Go ahead, Eric.
So in our ordinance, section 20-65 talks about delegation of authority to issue certificates of appropriateness for specific classes of work.
Mm-hmm.
Does that include windows potentially? Could the commission delegate authority to the staff person, appropriate staff person, you in this case, to make
Yes.
decisions about windows?
I believe the understanding we currently have is if you are replacing material exactly as is with something exactly as is, then I am able to administratively approve it. And then for roofs, I can administratively approve it, and I just follow the policies here. Windows are a little bit more difficult because they don't make a lot of the windows that we see anymore, or you'll see a house with 6 vinyl windows, 2 wood, and an aluminum window hodgepodge together. So a lot of times what I'll do for windows is try and see what I can do and always kind of push them towards rehabilitation when I meet with them before they submit their application. If they rehabilitate it, I can process administratively just so we have a record of the work. We've had a lot of applicants recently go that route. We've had some persuasive people on our commission kind of have them save a lot of money and retain the historic windows, which has been a really good thing to see. But other than that, I'll kind of say bring in a few different ideas that you may be comfortable with, and then we can work with it as the commission. But unless it's something I'm relatively comfortable that is within the scope of work that's already existing on the home, I won't do windows administratively.
Go ahead, Eric. Were you asking a question?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and I was just going to ask that question, sort of how often do you think you're approving things administratively? Like how often does that come up?
In the last fiscal year, we had 51 administrative approvals and 16 approved by the commission.
Okay, that's helpful.
Out of those 51, I think over 30 would probably be roofs.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Go ahead.
But a lot of times, somebody will bring an idea, and it just basically goes to your office, and you say, nope, you're not going to be able to get vinyl siding. And so you would never even get an application for that.
We have had them. We've had some emergency situations where vinyl's been approved. There was a house fire in Chesterfield
Right,
Hills.
we saw those, yeah.
We met with them on site, and we did the material check there with the chair and vice chair and myself. That way we could get them out of a hotel back in their home. I say that you could, I give the caveat, you can always try any material you'd like to. Whether or not it's accepted, I don't know. That's generally out of my hands. That's why I like to tell people to bring in maybe an alternative material as well that they're comfortable with. So if their first choice is not approved, they can get the second one in the same meeting.
Jake, does the city know, or have you guys, or the Historic District Commission reached out? I think Diane alluded to this, about having people who do rehab. So companies that are in this sort of greater Lansing region, or even in the 4 or 5 county region, that do window or door rehab. I mean, I think the roofing is a little less challenging, but the window is. So if we're telling them you should rehab them and you should have someone come in and repair them, but nobody will come do that, then that's not as
there's
genuine.
Quite honestly not very many window rehabilitation places in the surrounding area. What we do to recommend contractors, because I noticed that was a comment in here, we don't recommend work out to people as city staff, or I don't in any way, when it comes to specifically historic things. So what I'll do is give them the State Historic Preservation Office list of contacts. That way they can find and contact multiple people off of the recommended list from the state and see who's their best fit.
The state office provides a list of rehabilitation?
Yes, SHPO has a list. I have it somewhere saved deep in my emails that I forward back out. I don't think that there's been any issue with some people finding them. The quality of their experiences, I'm sure, have varied. But I've had a lot of people go that route, and a lot of people start to go that route, especially in the last year since we've been trying to recommend it more. In terms of finding some sort of programming to help people learn how to do that, I tried to advertise the state conference last year to get people there for a workshop, but then Diane Wing, who spoke earlier, has gone to a workshop in Grand Rapids for it. So I've also kind of started to mention to people there may be opportunities for you to learn how to do it yourself if you can find something that offers it. As for how much that would cost, or to get that here, or to hold our own workshop, is something we floated, but I don't know feasibly what we could do with that. It's a relatively intensive thing without a workshop.
Yeah. People have to be willing and want to do their own. So that's not.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thanks very much.
So can I just discuss?
Go ahead.
So, and weigh in, because I know you've been having these conversations too with many of my neighbors. I'm sure you hear it from your own neighbors, and probably you do too. So part of the reason for bringing this forward, I think, part of this is a lack of clarity. And I think if you look at some of these examples, there are other communities that are just very specific, and windows are always a bugaboo. It's clear to me. I looked at a bunch of cities, but I think when we have cases where they're being replaced with like materials, right? So if we say we prefer repair, or if you do have to replace, you're going to replace with wood windows and true divided light and exterior mounted muntins or whatever. If that comes in, I want to be able to see that we can have that administratively approved. If that's, if it's meeting the historic preservation standards. If it's something slightly different and there are other materials to be considered, clad windows, maybe they always say no, maybe they say yes, I don't know, but I think that needs to be clear to homeowners. I think one of the issues is that a lot of homeowners don't know what their options are, and they get this flyer and they do the repairs, but it's on how to maintain these. But when they're having an issue with like a rotting windowsill or whatever, and the neighbor who I've been talking to, I know you've talked to a lot, they have companies that are like, we won't work in East Lansing Historic District. Even on a window replacement, they are being told, they went out for 6 bids, they got 3, and 3 of them said, I will not do work in the Historic District in East Lansing. And I said, did you get a bid, did you go out to anybody to do about repair? And he said, I never thought about repair. I don't even, what would that look like? I don't know. And I said, well, you'd have to go and find on SHPO's site. And then they did. But I think part of the issue is, when you live in a historic district, you're trying really hard to maintain your house, and there are things you want to do, but when you're faced with some of these repairs that are enormous, so to replace all the windows in this house we were talking about in particular is $30 grand. And and roofs can be like that too, and people get that. Things are expensive, and old homes are expensive, but they were like, here's the downside of that, right? And their house, by the way, is one of those hodgepodge houses, has a whole bunch of mixed windows on it. So the downside of that is they're like, our house desperately needs to be we just painted it, but we have some work that needs to be done. We're not going to be able to do that for a couple of years now, because we're going to spend $30 grand on windows, And so I just think we need to be clear and help people, one, so they know where to go, what's allowed, give that flexibility where that flexibility is there, and make sure that it's when they go to the website, this is what it's done, and here are some places I can go to find a contractor, and I never even thought about rehab. Great, I can look here. And then I think the clean energy thing is just going to come up more and more. And there's some really great standards. I think National Park Service and others has some very great resources that I put here. So I'd like to see the Historic Commission move ahead with those changes. And I guess my recommendation today is just that we refer this all to them for their next meeting and have them come back with recommended.
They could do that without any referral from us, but
Yeah.
obviously we would
Yeah.
like you to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we don't have a September meeting because of lack of business, but I will draft up some stuff and get a packet ready for October to include as our commission business.
Okay. So when do you meet in October?
It's always the second Thursday, so that would.
You're gonna be
Just trying to figure out the timing a little here for myself, selfishly.
Sorry, I don't know any dates. We always meet the second Thursday, so that would be October 10th. 7
So-
p.m. in this courtroom.
Could we, if we looked at that date, could that come back to us by the end of October? That could be then, right?
All right. Next item on our agenda is 4.7, which is consideration of council agenda procedures. Aaron.
So, I wanted to bring this up because it's a question that I've asked a few times throughout my last couple of years here. And I think we've had, as a council, an understanding of things being put on agendas and kind of what the status quo has been. And I think it's important that we actually put something in writing on this. So, you know, previously in the past, I have been asked, and I'll pull up some stuff, but, you know, our standard for agenda setting has been, you know, has the mayor gone through it? Is the mayor okay with it? Add it onto the agenda. That's not something that I'm saying as like an anecdotal thing. It's what I've heard from other council members as well. People haven't had issues with it, but, you know, I do find issue with the ability for one council member to have that control over what the agenda is. I think that at a regular meeting, you know, if I were to make a motion for something and there was a second to add on to the agenda, we'd all vote on it, similar to the approval of the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. I think it's not that unrealistic to do it before the agenda is actually put out there. Obviously, the interest in that, even though I would have the ability to, or any council member would have the ability to make a motion to add something to the agenda at the meeting, is that the public gets to see it beforehand. I think this is just kind of an important cleanup issue too, because we have been going under an assumption right now that actually isn't in our policy. And if, you know, I wouldn't agree to have one council member, you know, have the final cut of an agenda, but if that's the way that we want to operate, then we should have that actually in policy. So I went back and forth to Tom really, really briefly and just drafted the tiniest addendum to this. And it wouldn't really restrict anybody from doing anything. It wouldn't, you know, hinder the ability for staff to put anything on or any council members to talk to anybody. But it would be a way for any council member to get something on a business agenda in the similar fashion of if I were to make a motion and a second. And I also added an addendum in there that says the mayor can get anything added on because I think it's important, especially for you know, our city manager and others, if they need something, you know, quickly added on as something I don't want to go and farm out and see if I can get, you know, council support for. You know, it's good to have that as an ability for discussion. This kind of lends to a bigger discussion, which is we don't want to have things decided before the actual agenda. I think it's okay for us to discuss things at a council meeting. I think it's okay to disagree. I think it's okay to vote on things that will fail. Just because I think that's what we do as a legislative body, and I think that our tendency is to only put things on an agenda that we know are going to pass or that we know have support. And I don't think that's how we should operate. I think we should operate under the assumption that everything's going to be discussed, and we're going to have that at a public meeting because that's what the public views us as doing. So again, this is like a really, really, really basic change. And it's just kind of outlining what I think it should already be policy, but is, you know, I think a good addition to our council agenda setting procedures. And I discussed it with the city manager before, and he obviously is okay with either adopting or not adopting, but he didn't see an issue with this actually hindering staff in any way, so.
Well, I'll comment. I'll just say that, you know, you're giving me or the mayor an authority that they don't have right now, because anybody can put anything on the agenda. Plus, now you have it so that you need two people to agree, or a person to agree with you in order to put something on the agenda, and you don't have that restriction at this point in time, because anybody can put anything on the agenda.
So that's not the understanding. I mean,
That
you
is
know,
actually correct. There's nothing in here which gives anybody veto authority. The city manager creates the agenda. Any one of us could say, hey, I don't think it's time to do that. You can talk to him about it, but, you know, we don't do it that way.
So nobody else on this council has ever been asked, is the mayor okay with it? And then
I don't know that you have either. Nobody's talked to me about that.
I have.
You
And I have emails to back it up too. I mean,
Well,
like, this isn't.
all I can say is that maybe staff's, you know, perception of what's been going on, but there's nothing in these rules that say that.
Well, I'd
But
be fine
don't-
with-
as I've told you, I don't have a problem with this. You know, if you want to put this
I think you did have a
forward, I
problem
think
with it
it's
for a
good,
bit.
but I've got some changes too that I want to do. And so let's talk about them now, because I think I take care of your issue in a different way. So I know everybody's got a copy of this, because this is attached, and it has all of the
original.
the original resolution on it. But
Wait, you're looking at
there's
the
a
original?
question I've got. If we can move to number 8 under council meetings.
On page 1.
Yeah, it's page 2, actually. It might be
Okay.
page 1 on
Wait,
that.
so what document are we looking at? I'm confused, because.
Are we looking at agenda, or are we looking at mayoral responsibility?
No, we're just looking at the resolution, the
He has the
existing
amendment.
resolution.
He has the amendment in. If you go to the first page of his proposed resolution, that's the original resolution.
Yeah, I mean, it has everything that we have right now.
Okay, so number 8, in addition.
Number 8,
Did you find it?
it talks about, on the city's website or PEG television stations showing
Yeah,
the
I think I-
substance of
yeah,
each
just
separate
wasn't
proceeding at council. We actually have video now. Should we have in here a requirement that it be, a video be
Absolutely.
available? So we need to make that change. In number 10, we have action on any agenda item may be postponed to a date certain. That eliminates, and we did this with something you had, where we tabled indefinitely. Tabling is an indefinite. We don't have a date certain, but we don't mention that here. Basically, we restricted ourselves to only a certain way of going forward. So I think we need to add or tabled indefinitely.
Yeah, I think that reflects.
And then in number 2, under resolutions, I think we really only want number 2 to apply to policy resolutions. You know, we shouldn't like keep track of every motion that we've made, which is basically a resolution. So I think we ought to add all written policy resolutions to that, and I think that clarifies what we're really trying to do here.
Wait a minute, let me just, so up
That's
above.
what we do.
Written policy resolutions, written resolutions which are required by,
I actually think you should say all policy resolutions, not all written policy resolutions.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's a good point. Although it says shall be signed by the mayor, so, you know, so I think it only applies to written ones.
The electronic signature.
Yeah, I don't know that we have any other kind.
what other resolutions? So what would categorize, like, so number 1 be.
The mayor thinks a
resolutions.
vote is a resolution.
Huh?
I think he's saying that a vote is.
Say verbal resolutions.
No, I know,
at a
that's C,
council
but
meeting.
B is written resolutions. It doesn't say policy resolutions. 1B says written resolutions which are required by charter, ordinance, state law. So
1B.
which adopts a resolution, which approves written rules, which are, God, that's a lot of whiches, which are permitted by the charter or required by
Right.
ordinance. Because, like, what would that be? I'm trying to think of.
Probably let's just say,
Like a budget resolution?
maybe a budget resolution, but also possibly if we have a assessment. In a particular neighborhood, we have to have a resolution approving that assessment. That would be required by the charter.
And so why wouldn't we keep that as being signed by you, just because you think there's too many of them? You think it's too?
Well, I think the idea is we have resolutions on the website that are numbered
Uh-huh.
as policy resolutions. They don't include any of that stuff. You know,
Gotcha.
we don't do that with the budget resolution or
Okay.
things like that. So
Okay.
it's drawing a distinction.
I'm fine with it, I just trying to scenario play.
Okay, I think I mentioned before that I've got an issue with add-ons. And so the add-on, I've talked to the city manager about this. You know, we basically, we have an agenda that is sent out at noon or around on Friday, and then, on Monday there's items added, on Tuesday there's items added, and that is not the way we operated in the past. So I'm suggesting that when we do preparation and content of the agenda, it provide that made available to the public, which is the next page, 3.1, made available to the public by the city manager by noon on the Friday immediately preceding a scheduled council meeting. As you'll see, I think that closes the agenda. Prior to 5 p.m. on the Thursday, prior to a discussion only or business meeting, I would add, any council member or the city attorney may request that any item be placed on an agenda by communicating that request to the city manager. Takes care of your issue, I think, without the other language.
And by the way, I am 100% okay with having a singular.
Okay.
The reason why I didn't do that beforehand is because I heard concern from yourself and others that if we had only one council member have the ability to put something on a business agenda, that they could put whatever they wanted, that you wanted to see support beforehand. And so that was my original idea.
No, you heard from me the danger of just putting something on an agenda and then having everybody else not agree with it. I was.
So, but that's what this would be doing, correct?
It lets you put anything on an agenda.
Okay.
So and then if so requested, the item shall be placed on the agenda unless the request is withdrawn prior to publication of the agenda. So, I mean, you still have, the city manager can say, hey, why are we doing this today? And then you can pull it from the agenda if you choose to.
But
Sorry.
Give me that language again, because I want to make sure who's pulling the request, unless it.
If so requested, the item shall be placed on the agenda unless the request is withdrawn prior to publication of the agenda.
So the request from the council member is withdrawn.
Yeah.
Right.
Correct?
I couldn't request to have yours withdrawn,
Right.
unfortunately.
The request is the request to put it on. So. And then in 4, add a discussion-only meeting. Items may be added to the discussion-only meeting agenda by a majority vote of the council. I just wanted to clarify that. At a business meeting in number 5, items may be added to the agenda by unanimous consent. But I wanted to add, the city manager may request items be added to the agenda, items requiring prompt action be added to the agenda at the meeting. So at the beginning of the meeting, George could say, we have these 2 contracts that need to be signed this week. I'd like to add those to the agenda, the permission to do that, and we could vote to add it to the
Can
agenda.
you clarify that you're talking about number 3 for a business
No,
agenda?
number 5 actually this time.
Items may be added. So that's just for special meetings. Items may be added to the agenda of a special meeting.
I'm sorry. Yeah, but I took out, at a special meeting.
I think you want number 3. Items may be added to a business agenda by unanimous consent.
Right, you're right, I want that
or
language
if
up
the
there.
city manager.
Good point.
Can I make a suggestion on that point?
Yep.
I think the city manager should be able to put items on the agenda without us having to vote on them. If
I
they
don't agree
require
with
prompt-
that,
if they
because we've
require
got an
prompt-
agenda that's published at that point in time.
But if they require prompt action, and we can leave it to
Then
him.
all he's got to do is bring them to us. Obviously, we're going to agree or disagree if it needs prompt action, but it also puts a limitation on what he's going to present us.
So that would then, and this is just clarification, but that would limit the ability for add-ons basically completely
Absolutely.
until we vote on it at the agenda.
That's it, and that's what we used to do.
Okay.
So
I like that.
I think it still works.
I mean, that puts the power in the elected officials. So.
Well, it still gives
No, it does.
George
I'm
the,
just-
the power for immediate action, but what it gets away from is things that come up. Can I clarify too? Because sometimes we have add-on items versus add-on things on the agenda, right? So there might be supporting documentation that comes on. Those are both been issues. And I think we might want to address both, but, right, like, so if we have a policy thing in front of us and there are still things about, like, so there may be a new document that goes up the day.
I think
of the
those should
meeting.
be able to be added. you know, because that actually informs the
Sometimes that
public
happens.
as opposed
Although
to.
I will just reiterate that I don't think those should happen after
Gotcha.
Monday morning.
Okay, well, we should look at that, adding that language. at
Just
some
because
point.
prep time. I mean.
Gotcha. And the reason that I think by adding all this to the 5 PM on a Thursday prior, because if you add something to the agenda, staff has to arrange
Yep.
to make.
No, I think it
I
makes
think it's
complete
reasonable.
sense. I don't.
So number 9, I just had a question on that. Every agenda shall provide a time for council member comments, shall provide for mayoral announcement of any resolution adopted at a discussion-only meeting.
We don't do that.
I don't think we should be doing that, so I'm suggesting that we put a period after council member comments and just eliminate the rest of this. Now, we have not, at least other than, I think, once last year,
We did.
we haven't
didn't
taken a
vote
vote
this
on
last year.
anything at a
I know.
discussion-only meeting.
But
'cause
we invoked this
We
last
said
year.
this is a discussion-only meeting. So should we eliminate number 10?
I think we should keep it. Personally, I think it's really rare that it comes up, but
We might vote on this tonight.
No, I think we have got some writing to do.
Oh, okay.
All right, and then in mayoral responsibilities, number 1, like, Aaron has never requested to meet with me on a monthly basis. You have, and we have met. I communicate with the other 2 on a monthly basis at least. And I want to add the language, shall meet in person or electronically, so that we can talk on the phone and meet this requirement. Is that?
I don't think you need to. I think meeting is defined under Open Meetings Act would cover that.
So that's a meeting no matter what?
It's a meeting.
Okay, all right. That's it. Those are the changes I went through and I thought.
I think they're great.
All right, we'll have this redrafted and put it on the agenda. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. I think this has always been how it's done. When I have considered whether or not the mayor knows about it, I'm just trying to gauge, where it is, how many people have talked about it, how many people, I'm just trying to get a feeling of where it might end up when we vote. But I want to be careful that people respect the agenda. So everybody can put anything they want. If you've ever seen the Berkeley City Council agenda, it's amazing. They have resolutions against everything that's going on all over the world every day. And all they're doing is building up their liberal bona fides so they can run for some other office in California. So I don't want to do that. You also can use it for political purposes. You can bring up things that make people look bad right before an election, things like that. I hope that we all respect what the agenda's for, which is to do what's best for the city and not any kind of self-dealing.
That's not gonna happen.
Okay.
It's not gonna happen.
It's not gonna happen.
If you create a mechanism for people to do something, they're gonna do it.
I won't do it.
No, I know you won't do it, and I'm not gonna do it, but.
Well, there you go.
Well, we're not the only 2 people on the council. So here's the question I really wanted to ask, which is, what's the point of discussion-only meetings now? So here's why I ask this. This is not a randomly written process here. And I think it's thoughtfully laid out, and I don't want to change it. My understanding has always been the city manager drafts the business agenda. The way the process is supposed to work, according to the way I've tried to make it work, is you have discussion-only meetings where anybody can put an item on an agenda, but there's no votes. That is an opportunity for that person to make their pitch. And if the pitch attracts interest, not necessarily a foregone conclusion that everybody decides they're going to pass it, but if the pitch attracts interest, then the city manager reads the room, and he says, if there's a majority of people who are interested in some version of this policy change, whatever it is, then let's invest some staff resources to make it something that's formal enough to be a candidate for a vote or for a referral. And then it goes on a business meeting according to the city manager's discretion. I think that's the right way to do it. The balance is between justice for people who want to have their voices heard and getting stuff done efficiently. And if there's majority support for something at a discussion-only meeting, or for considering it, then it makes sense to invest the time and resources to formalize it in a way that it's candidate for a vote or for referral. This is not a random set of policy procedures that we're dealing with here, and I don't think there's anything broken. I think they've been working fine for 20 years, and I think that people have had an opportunity to make use of the rules to make their voices heard. There's plenty of opportunity here built in for political theater, and I don't think we need to add any more. And I think if we're going to go in this direction, then we should just eliminate discussion-only meetings.
I second that.
I disagree. I think that the temporary parking for food delivery drivers is a perfect example of something that we were just discussing. We were asking questions. Maybe we come out with a policy about it, maybe we don't. You know, we didn't today, but there was the potential for, you know, maybe another hub for people to come into and you know, park for 15 minutes. Maybe there was the conversation on increasing the time latency from 5 minutes to 15 minutes. It's a perfect example of what a discussion-only meeting can do. And there's no policy around that, so we're not discussing a policy, we're discussing a topic, right? I think that's a great example of something at a discussion-only meeting that's valid. But I also think it's important that people are able, and by the way, to your own point, my initial edit to this was basically going inside with what you could do anyway at a meeting. The only thing that I was intending on changing is making sure that you could have it on the agenda beforehand, right? So the public could see it. Because I could make a motion at a meeting for any policy whatsoever, get a second, and then we would vote on whether or not we want to consider that policy. Not on the policy, on whether or not we want to consider it. And my argument is that the approval of the agenda at the meeting, if it is not entirely symbolic, is in fact that vote. Because if I wanted to have something added onto the agenda, I had one other person in support of it, it is the equivalent of having a motion, a second, and a vote. But if there is going to be a consensus that anybody can add anything onto a business item agenda, that's not what I proposed, but I think we all have the same legislative ability, so I'm open to it. But my original proposal kept in line with what exactly are our standards. It would just allow somebody to put it on the agenda beforehand so the public could view it. That was it.
Go ahead. I agree. I mean, to me, it's a transparency issue. I mean, if that's sort of how we've been proceeding, then now we're putting things on the agenda and the public can be noticed. And that has come up. We've had a few things where we've tried to add something to the agenda and then the public isn't noticed, there's not documents up there, and you can't really have a robust discussion. Or what we end up doing is saying, well, we're going to table it for another night or something because they haven't done that, and then it's less efficient. So I will commit for my very small remainder of time that no grandstanding. I agree. I've seen a lot of agendas like this, and they can be nutty. So I do think we have to respect that. But I do think this is important for both transparency, but also just to ensure that we're not having to do a lot of sort of coordination and feeling that out. I have been told that, like, where's the mayor on this, or do you have other council members supporting this? Otherwise, it's not going on the agenda. So, or maybe not quite that direct, but pretty close to that direct. And I just think sometimes there are things, and I think sometimes there's timing things, and we don't meet all the time either. So our last discussion-only meeting was June 11th. So there's timing issues as well. So if we're going to be a council that takes the summer off, then that doesn't work either. So I think there are efficiency reasons. Sometimes things come up and they're not even that big of a policy issue. You just want to bring it up. It's a kind of a no-brainer issue. We've had several of those. And so to put it on, notice it, have the discussion, and move on with it without having to first hit a discussion-only meeting and then wait, 3 more weeks for, to come. I just don't think it's always necessary. I don't think this is like, oh, this is broken. I think this is we kind of have to do it this way, and let's just codify it and do it.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Would you be willing to take something like the rental overlay discussion that we had today? We wouldn't have it at a discussion-only meeting because you could just put it on the agenda.
Yeah, but okay, so maybe you're right. That's just good. I wouldn't do that because that's a big issue. Like, I can use my professional judgment to understand that that's an issue that needs discussion, that I need that we need some staff input on, and things like that. So that wouldn't be my preference. I suppose there is somebody who could do that. I wouldn't have done it with the historic one either, because even though in theory I could have brought it and just said, let's refer this to the historic commission, That one, right, that's kind of a jump ball. Maybe that would have been resolved that way, but I was like, well, it seems discussion only. And because in my head, like, that was an issue I wanted to bring, and my understanding, what I was always told was, you have to bring anything like that to discussion only meeting first.
And I'd just like to point out that every business meeting regardless, we have an approval of the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. And
You said that already.
I know, but if you want to have something taken off, you think it's grandstanding, you think that it should be at a discussion only meeting, you can make a motion to not have it on that agenda.
I'm not gonna assess your ideas, what?
I'm just saying. Like,
Oh, hypothetically.
yeah, like
Oh,
that's your avenue to get rid of the, you know.
Gotcha.
Well, let's, based on that conversation, that answer, what if preparation and content of the agenda said prior to 5 p.m. on the Thursday prior to discussion only, or business meeting after it has been discussed, after the item has been discussed, any council member or a city attorney may request any item to be placed on the agenda. In other words, putting in that requirement that if you want to just say it's going on the business agenda, you've had it discussed at a discussion only
No, I think
meeting.
that's not what I want to have happen.
Okay.
I'm saying, I don't want
I
that.
think the original
I
language-
misunderstood you that. I thought
No,
that.
I don't want that requirement.
I think
You're
the
just saying
original
that you
language
would
is
have done
good.
that with
I'm
this
saying,
one.
my own judgment is that in the case of the rental overlay, I would never have just put that on a business agenda.
Gotcha.
Because I
Right.
had no idea where you
Right.
guys were gonna be on that, like,
Gotcha.
but if it was something minor.
Gotcha.
Well, on the issue of a discussion-only meeting, I guess my feeling is that we made this change in December of 2015. We changed the nature of this to identify discussion-only meetings, because one of the criticisms of the council was that you'd have a work session and then pass a bunch of stuff at a work session, and we wanted to prevent that. So
Yeah,
we
no, I think so.
clearly stated this is going to be for discussion only, and I think we need to continue with that.
I agree.
That,
That's fine.
you know, we have this one minor exception, that's fine. You know, it hasn't, it's only been used once, I think, so, you know, it would be unlikely that we would actually pass anything
I just
at a
don't,
meeting like this.
I just don't want to load up the business agenda with 15 things that have 1 or 2 votes. And
Right,
it
and I
just-
think,
I think that's a really legitimate concern, I do.
and I think it's a legitimate concern also, but I think that there's a learning curve, and if somebody keeps putting things on the agenda and then they get shot down, eventually they're gonna learn they gotta talk to council members and decide what the support is, because it's pointless to just give a speech about something and then have everybody else say no. So I think, you know, I think most people understand that.
And if not, when they come in, their chair will be back there next time it comes.
Yeah, that's right.
Your chair will be plugged in.
All right, any other discussion on this?
So
We'll have it redrafted,
Yeah.
and then probably, assuming Tom can get it done by next week, then we'll do it, if not, the week after.
So please don't kill me, but I have one more thing, I don't know if it belongs on
Oh,
here,
yeah.
I don't think it is this, but the memo format, I sent a note to Nicole and George earlier, the memo format that accompanied today, and I think that's part of our new system. I love it. I'm gonna I circulated to, I gave these out to them, I'm gonna circulate it to them. I would love to see if we can, and it would require some recoding, that those memos be used for discussion only and business agenda items, and that, you know, it's like background, financial impact. One of the things I've talked to George about many, many times is to have a section in there that would say sort of commissions or staff that have reviewed this, and then just a bulleted list, like, yep, it went to the planning commission on this date, they voted 7-2.
Sure.
Environmental commission, something like that. Nicole's gonna work on it. I don't think it's
Fits
this,
in there,
but,
yeah, right.
but
Just a
it's a
way
procedure
of
thing.
presenting information to
yeah.
us.
So it's a heads up that's.
I have one more thing, because now that I think about it. The last item in the guidelines, or the resolution, relates to any council member may request the city attorney to provide retainer services regarding city business. Other council members should be advised of a request for the preparation of an ordinance or formal written legal opinion, or for the city attorney's participation in a meeting. I'm just going to say that I hardly ever, if I talk to Tom about something, I hardly ever tell anybody, and I don't think anybody else here does either, but it does cost us money every time something like that happens. So there was a reason that we put this language in originally, and I think it would behoove us to keep in mind that it helps when you've asked Tom to do something, to let everybody else know. Whether you're asking them to agree with you or not is not the issue. It's just letting them know that you're headed in that direction. Then nobody's surprised when something comes forward.
Well, and Tom has told me, because I didn't follow this one time, I didn't really realize, and he said not only that, but it allows him then to share information. Like, he can't proactively always say, because those conversations are confidential, but if you let council know and he's copied on that, then he knows that.
He can talk to other council members about it. Okay, yeah. So another good reason to do it, to pay attention. All right. I think that actually concludes the agenda. Nope, communication from council members. Councilmember Stevens, anything?
I'd just like to thank those girls that are obviously now gone, but coming and sharing their stories. Obviously, an interesting and difficult thing to do, especially for somebody coming from out of state to have that significant issue happen. I'm glad they could come and talk about that.
Councilmember Byer, Mayor Pro Tem. Nothing from me. City manager report.
Just one item. We have our new streaming platform up. They're both running at the same time, so we're running Granicus and iCompass. This should be the last, that was sort of our soft launch of iCompass. I think it's been working nicely. I've been using it today and going through all the attachments. We talked about the format being a little bit different. I think it's a little bit more user-friendly, hopefully. And next meeting, we plan to not have Granicus up and running, and all people will be directed to iCompass. Hopefully your experience is good. If it's not, let us know immediately. But it should be our streaming platform, hopefully working perfectly from this point on. And we're going to be transferring all of the back data from Granicus to iCompass. So Granicus will still be up and available for historical data. After we get it all transferred at some point in the near future, then Granicus will disappear completely. And we'll just be going to iCompass. That's all I've got. Thank you.
And that means we're adjourned. Thanks for coming tonight.